This entire episode is about one thing, which is making the distinction between fake and real spirituality. This one distinction will make a lot of difference for you as you go about doing spiritual work and interacting with spiritual people, allowing you to distinguish the real from the fake, because this gets muddled and confused a lot, and we'll explain why that is. So, first though, I want you to recognize that there are wrong ways of doing spirituality. But don't just take my word for that. This is something I want you to contemplate for yourself and really think about, explore. Are there wrong ways of doing spirituality, and what are those ways? What are some examples of those ways? And more importantly, what makes them wrong? That's the key. So think about that for yourself. I'm going to give you my answers, but this is something that you really need to think about for yourself. Because here's why we start from this angle, is because we live in postmodern times. We live in relativistic times where it's popular, especially in New Age circles where spirituality is rampant and where you're probably going to be learning it from, New Age people. This kind of spiral dynamic stage green relativistic mentality of like, well, who's to say that there is such a thing as a wrong spirituality? I mean, I do spirituality my way, and then you can do it your way, just like, live and let live. Let everybody do spirituality their own way. And of course, there's a nugget of truth to that, right? Because we don't want to fall into that kind of absolutist stage blue trap where we're saying that there's only my way of doing spirituality and everybody else is wrong. Obviously, that's wrong. That itself is a wrong way of doing spirituality. So we're not trying to say that, but we are trying to say that spirituality is about something. It's not just anything goes and believe whatever you want and then do whatever you want. There's real criteria, like what is the purpose of spirituality? And then when you look around, and if you're going to take this on a very relativistic position of like, well, postmodernism and all that, and you're going to say, well, to each his own, then you have a problem, because you're actually not going to be able to live out that worldview. Here's why. Because you're going to encounter stuff like Nazi mysticism. Is that a legitimate way of doing spirituality? Do you want to say that's legitimate? I don't think so. How about in certain underdeveloped parts of the Middle East where they have madrasas that beat children with sticks and force them to memorize the Quran? Are you willing to say that that's a legitimate way of doing spirituality? That's real spirituality? See, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough for you to maintain that position. So you have to be very careful with this kind of relativism. So what I'm saying here is that there are clearly wrong ways of doing spirituality. There is a core to spirituality, which is the right way of doing spirituality. But within that core, there's a lot of then variability. So it's not like you have to believe in a certain thing or you have to do things exactly using certain techniques or formulas. You have a lot of latitude. But there's a structural component to spirituality, which is what we're going to outline here, which is very important to understand, which is distinguishes it from all the fake stuff out there and all the illegitimate ways and all the wrong ways. All right, so what is spirituality really about? When you get rid of all the New Age fluff, all the belief systems, all the ideologies, all the rituals, because, there's a lot of traditions, various traditions of spirituality. When you get rid of all of that stuff, all the conformity, all the groupthink, what do you have left? Because, you have spiritual traditions that go back thousands of years, and there's a lot of variability amongst these different traditions, whether it's the, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, or many other kinds that are out there. If we're going to say that there is something legitimate to all of these traditions, so we want to say, well, what is that? What is that thing? Because obviously there's so much variability. All the variability cannot be central to what spirituality is, right? Because if you can do it this way and that way and another way, then which way you're like praying doesn't really matter. There's something deeper that actually matters, not the words you say when you pray, because obviously different people can say different words when they pray. So, spirituality, the core of it is it's about realizing that your mind imagines all of reality. That's the truth. That's what's actually going on. Your mind imagines the whole world, all others, and yourself as well. All of that is imaginary. Real spirituality is about seeing through this illusion and all human games, all human constructions, until you realize that everything is an illusion of the mind, including the self, the world, humanity, and other. As you do this, you develop and you grow, your mind develops, and your relationship to reality changes. And this sets apart spirituality also from all the other stuff that humans do. Because, we also want to define, what's different between being a spiritual person and a non-spiritual person, a materialistic person, or, for example, a scientist? Is it legitimate to say that a scientist is spiritual? Well, no, it's not, unless they are doing what I just said, which is deconstructing this illusion that the mind is spinning, which is all of reality. Why is this the core of spirituality? Because ordinarily, humans are lost in the illusion. Just look around you. Look at how human beings behave, whether they're children or adults, men or women, or whether they're religious or not religious, scientific or not scientific, doing business or not doing business, whatever they're doing out there. The default condition of the human mind is to not be aware of what the human mind is doing, how the human mind is seeing the world, constructing the world. The human mind's constructions are just assumed and taken for granted as true, as how the world is, how reality is, and then we just go about living and surviving those ideas. Most people out there are not deeply questioning their worldview. They are not deeply questioning science or religion. They are not deeply questioning the New Age. They're not questioning anything. They're acquiring various belief systems and they're living based on those belief systems. And then what's worse is that they're becoming emotionally attached to those belief systems and then they're unconsciously defending those belief systems throughout their whole life. And they confuse that with spirituality. Spirituality is about getting to the truth of what reality is. It's about a deeper perception into the nature of reality. That's what it's about. It's not about believing in stuff. And in fact, believing in stuff is antithetical to this process of understanding reality as it is. Not reality as I want it to be, as I need it to be, as I was told by other human beings around me the way that it is, but the way that it actually is. And so distinguishing how I want and how I think reality is from how it actually is, this is the whole challenge of legitimate spirituality. And then illegitimate spirituality is when this gets muddled and confused. And then people start thinking that they've got reality, they understand reality, but really what they have is they just have ideas. They have ideas and strong opinions, but not how reality actually is. And of course, now this leads us to the sort of problem of, well, Leo, is there even such a thing as how reality actually is? Because who's to say that's even the case? Maybe reality just is whatever we believe it to be. Well, that's an open question, right? We're going to investigate that. We don't want to be prejudiced, but I'm just saying that there needs to be an inquiry into this matter, a deep investigation of reality. Most human beings never do this. What they do is they just assume that the picture that their culture tells them is what reality is, and they don't question any further, and then they just live based on that. I want you to notice that your mind is always making stuff up. Always. The mind is a machine that is constantly constructing things. Your mind is very imaginative. Try to remember how imaginative your mind was when you were a child. Make-believe, imaginary friends, and you would play with toys, and you would imagine these toys are real, alive, and you would play with them. And then we kind of think that, well, we outgrow that. Not really. Humans are always making stuff up. It's just that the constructive power of the mind as a child, it's easy to see through it. But then as adults, it's much, much more difficult to see through it. So if you just observe yourself, you will observe your own mind making stuff up all the time. For example, you're in a relationship and then your mind makes stuff up about your partner in the relationship. And then later you break up with that partner and then you realize, oh my God, my view of that partner was so twisted and distorted by my romantic feelings and my infatuation, my desire for sex and my need for intimacy and all that. And then you realize just how much stuff your mind made up about that person. You were not seeing that person accurately because you were so blinded by your emotional needs. That's in your relationships. Of course, your relationships are more than just your romantic ones. It includes your family, your friends, your coworkers, and everybody that you socialize with. But then notice how much your mind makes up stuff like maybe you want to start a business. You want to enter a new profession. You want to learn a new skill. Then your mind makes up fantasies about that skill that you're trying to learn. And then you fail because of that. You start a business and you have ideas about what kind of grand business you're going to start. And then when you actually start to create that business, you realize, oh no, the real business world works very differently than my fantasies about it. And then, of course, you can look out at the world and you see everybody else making stuff up also. You see people in cults with crazy religious beliefs and ideas. You see people in politics making stuff up all the time. The mind is a master at confabulation and fantasy. So we can all agree this is not a controversial point that the mind is always making stuff up. Now, the question is, how deep does this rabbit hole go? And really, spirituality is just about investigating this rabbit hole deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper you investigate it, eventually you realize that your mind is making up the whole world. And then it's just a question of, how's it doing that? Learning all the mechanics and ways that it's doing that. Now, of course, the problem, though, is that, nobody wants to admit that they're making stuff up. Because we make stuff up, we're not just making stuff up arbitrarily, as though we're kids playing games. We're making stuff up for a very serious purpose, and that serious purpose is survival. So we make stuff up that is beneficial to our survival, then we get comfortable building our nest of survival based on these mental constructs. And then our survival depends upon that. And now, when somebody comes along and says that it's all make-believe, that our mind made this stuff up, constructed stuff, projected stuff, we can't admit that, because to admit that would force us to confront the falseness of our lifestyle. So spirituality, real spirituality, is about deconstructing fantasy, illusion, and social constructs. The key word here is illusion. We're dealing with very, very powerful forces of illusion. Reality is a profound illusion. We are always deceiving ourselves. And it's very painful to confront our own self-deception and our own illusions. We easily see the illusions in others. You can easily see deluded people out in the world on social media, posting stupid things, posting obviously false things, but then you don't see it within yourself. And you don't see it within your tribe, within your community, within your subculture, within your larger mainstream culture, and within humanity at large. Many of the biases of the human species. You just don't see it because it's like you're a fish in water. You're part of it. You're immersed in it. Because for the first 20 years of your life, you're not thinking. You can't really think properly for the first 20 years of your life because you're just so busy going to school, getting filled with ideas, just basically learning how to struggle and survive. Remember back in school, in elementary school, you were struggling to survive. You were being bullied. Kids were laughing at you. Parents were forcing you to get good grades. Otherwise, they don't love you. You had to worry about, building your educational career. You had to worry about who you're going to be. Maybe your family had money problems. Maybe there was abuse in your family. You were surviving all that stuff. As a little kid, you didn't know how the world worked. You didn't know what was right and what was wrong. You didn't have a sophisticated epistemology. No, of course not. And so all of us were programmed with the illusions of our culture, of our era, of our time, wherever we grew up. And then the challenge is then overcoming those illusions. So real spirituality is deconstructing illusion to get to truth. False or fake spirituality is more illusion. When an illusion masquerades as though it's getting you to the truth, that is the very pernicious kind of very problematic, illegitimate, wrong spirituality. It has to be that. Genuine spirituality has to be about truth. The way reality actually is, not how we think it is for our own selfish purposes. This is what it's all about. And how do you overcome illusion? It's with truth. So I'm giving you multiple perspectives here on what genuine spirituality is. Deconstructing illusion, you could literally just call it truth. But the problem with calling it truth is that when I say truth, see, it doesn't do a lot of good, because when I say truth, anybody listening to this is going to say, oh yeah, Leo, I know the truth. Yeah, of course, it's the truth. My worldview is the truth. But that's not what I mean by the truth. I don't mean your worldview as being true. I mean a truth beyond your worldview. I mean a truth beyond culture. I mean a truth beyond religion. I mean a truth beyond science. I mean a truth beyond human rationality understanding. So already when you start to think that your worldview or your belief system is truth, that already is false spirituality. Because beliefs are not truth. No beliefs, for the purposes of this discussion, qualify as what we're calling truth here. Spirituality is about truth seeking, and it's not even so much getting to the truth as a logical statement that you have in your head. It's more about following a truth-seeking process. It's being truthful, living in a truthful way, using your mind in a truthful way. Not to just get an answer from somebody, but to live truthfully. What does it mean to live truthfully? That's not so easy to answer, and most people don't know. They couldn't tell you what this process is because what they think the process is just acquiring some beliefs that their culture gave them. That's not what it is. Truth-seeking is about inquiry, a personal inquiry. A personal inquiry, an existential inquiry is at the heart of the spiritual process. Figuring out what is reality, why is it here, why does it exist, what is its purpose, what is the self, what is the mind, what is truth, what is truthful living, what is the right way to live. That's what spirituality is really about. And then you have to go on a personal journey to figure out what those questions, how to answer those questions and what the answers are. And nobody can tell you. And you can't just read a book and the book just tells you, here's what reality is, here's what the self is, here's what the mind is, here's what the truth is. And then you just read it, you comprehend it, and you say, oh, okay, got it. And then you go on with life. No. The truth is so profound. This whole process, this whole inquiry process is going to take you decades of work. It's so profound that you can't just read the answers. Nobody can tell you the answers. And in fact, having people tell you the answers, that itself now becomes the trap, which leads to false forms of spirituality. Because the answers need to be derived for yourself. They need to be realized by you. Otherwise, they don't have the curative power and force. In the same way that if somebody does your push-ups at the gym for you, you hire a gym trainer at the gym to do your push-ups, we could say that that's a false form of exercise. Because you're not going to grow muscles that way. And so the whole trick with doing genuine spirituality is that the mind constantly wants to corrupt and twist genuine spiritual process into a fake, false version for, profound, important, existential reasons. But a little bit more about this truth component, this truth-seeking component. So truth-seeking is about a deep existential questioning of everything. You literally question every single element of reality. There is no sacred thing that you cannot question. Everything needs to be questioned. No belief, no hearsay, no assumptions. It's also about transcending concepts. The human mind is lost in concepts. Our conceptual projections are so thick that we're unable to see reality as it truly is. We are lost in concepts. So genuine spiritual process is about transcending the conceptual layer, whereas false spirituality is about constructing spiritual concepts. It's like, oh, I used to be an ancient pharaoh in past lives. You might acquire that kind of belief. That's a concept, right? Even just learning to distinguish concept from non-concept, that distinction in of itself is a rare but important and powerful, genuine spiritual lesson that most human beings have never learned. Most people don't even understand what a concept is and how to distinguish it from a non-concept and why that distinction is important. For example, most scientists don't understand that all of science is just concepts. Science is completely conceptual. There is no science without concepts. And yet, they take all that as truth, as reality. See, that's a problem. Same thing with Christians or Muslims. The entire Christian faith is all conceptual. It's all concepts. All of history, all of human history is concepts. To not even understand the significance of what I'm saying and why it's important, that already is a feature of false spirituality. Truth-seeking requires that you realize that you cannot trust any human being to give you the answers. Why not? Because of the problem of self-deception. If self-deception and illusion and our mind constructing stuff is such a prevalent problem, nobody is immune to this problem, that means that how can you know that what I'm telling you is true? Maybe my mind just made all this up. See, you don't know that. You can't know that. And that applies to anybody that you learn from or study from, no matter what their credentials, whether it's a scientist, whether it's a Nobel Prize winner, whether it's some guru. The bottom line is you don't know if they're self-deceived or not. It's not that they're liars trying to fool you, although, of course, you can find bad actors like that. That's not the real concern. The deeper concern is that we're all just so biased by our need for survival and the culture we grew up in and the era and time that we're growing up in, our personal emotional needs, the kind of indoctrination we had as a child and trauma we went through. And so we're so self-absorbed in our own view of the world that we can't be trusted. Nobody can be trusted. You can't trust anybody that they have transcended all of that and that they're delivering pure truth to you. Nor can you do that with me either. I'm not an exception here. I'm part of this whole mechanism. So then the problem arises of like, well then, Leo, how do I even know that that what you're saying here is true? Well, obviously, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm trying to guide you into exploring these questions for yourself. So here's the critical difference between genuine spirituality and all the nonsense out there. Genuine spirituality and spiritual teachings and high quality spiritual teachers, what they do is they guide you into questioning and getting insight for yourself. It's about an investigation of reality. It's not about making stuff up. It's not about believing me or trusting me, any of that. It's about me helping you to really think deeply about yourself, your own mind, humankind, psychology, and existential matters. It's about helping to draw these kinds of distinctions between, for example, I can help you to see that you're lost in concepts. I can help you to see the difference between a concept and non-concept. I can help you to see the difference between a belief and not a belief, right? Just to understand the difference between what is a belief and what is not a belief. That's a huge game changer for you for the rest of your life. Most people don't understand that difference. For example, most scientists don't understand that 99% of science is just belief. So it's about this kind of guidance. Now you might say, if you're very skeptical, you might say, well, Leo, how do I even know that that's true? How do we know we can trust you even on these distinctions and so forth that you're saying? I mean, you're saying these things, but how do we know that's true? Great, yeah, but by all means, be skeptical. Be as skeptical as you can possibly be. But of course, now I have to warn you here is that you're going to have to be very unbiased in your skepticism. You can't just be skeptical only of me. You have to be skeptical of everybody then. And of course, of yourself as well. Don't forget to be skeptical of yourself. So yes, genuine spirituality, you could also say that it's a profound skepticism, which is the opposite of what most people think religion and spirituality is. It's just belief and faith. No. It can't be belief and faith. Why not? Because it's very easy for you to just observe within yourself how easily the mind can come up with all sorts of silly beliefs that have no connection to reality. You've done this yourself in your life. You know people in your life who have done this to themselves, who have fooled themselves with all sorts of false beliefs, people in your family, friends, and so forth. And you know throughout history that mankind has been doing this since the dawn of time, has been believing silly things all the time. So you can't rely on belief. You also can't rely on trusting people. You can't trust traditions. You can't trust culture because we know how corrupt all these things can be. But see, I don't want you to believe me in that. I want you to investigate your own direct experience, to observe, and to see, is what I'm saying true? So you're starting to see the difference. This is difficult to do because even for me, it's difficult because as I teach, I have my own opinions and biases and beliefs. Of course I do. And sometimes I just want to give you the answer. It's a lot more like, it's sort of like the most obvious thing to do is just to give somebody the answer. But for example, if you had a child and you really wanted to teach the child some, profound life lesson, how would you do it? Would you do it by just indoctrinating the child? No, that's a poor way of teaching. You would do it by an inquiry process, a sort of a Socratic method. You would ask probing questions. Have the child come to his or her own conclusions. You would point the child to resources that they could read. You would give them multiple perspectives. You would help the child by giving them certain distinctions and criteria for how to judge things. But see, it's so tricky because even the criteria that you give your child could already infect your child with your own biases. And you have to be careful because when you're teaching your child, see, you're assuming that you know better than your child. You know what's better for your child than he or she knows for themselves. But you can't assume that. And a lot of parents do not know better than their children. And they infect their children with all sorts of false beliefs and ideas and advice. So if you're a very self-aware parent, you have to realize that you have to be humble and you can't just assume that you know everything. And so you have to leave open this kind of a possibility space where your child could even outgrow you. Your child could know more than you. How do you do that? Well, by pointing the child to resources so the child can do the work. But you see, this takes work. And that's the whole trick is that people are very lazy. They want to conserve energy. That's what our mind is always doing. So it's just looking for answers. It's a lot easier just to tell your child, if your child comes and asks you, why is the sky blue? Or, does God exist? It's easy for you just to say, yes, God exists. Or no, God does not exist. And then the child just believes it, but this is not very beneficial for your child. It's not developing the child's mind. To develop the child's mind, you would need to give them multiple perspectives and then have them come to their own conclusions. So can you see that there's a qualitative difference there between these different ways of educating and teaching? So just by that distinction alone, you can start to distinguish between genuine and fake spirituality. Because a lot of spirituality is just telling you stuff, telling you how things are, without explaining how to derive it for yourself, without giving you the tools and techniques. See, like Christians will tell you that Jesus is the savior of mankind. He died for our sins. How do you know that's true? See, that's the obvious first question is, how do you know that's true? How does anybody know that's true? Where's the evidence for that? That should be your first question. See? So just on that point alone, Christianity fails right there. Already failed. Because it's not observing proper epistemic method. Now, the question then is, well, what is the proper epistemic method? This requires a meta-inquiry, right? Because, see, this problem is so tangled that I can't even just give you the proper epistemic method. As much as I would want to, I have to hold myself back, not to just give out all the answers, even though I do that in most of my talks. I do that. But really, it's a disservice to you guys because ideally, I would be asking you a lot of questions and not giving you any answers. That's the best way to teach. But, given the limitations of this format, because we're not face-to-face, and I don't want to just leave you with a bunch of questions and no answers, that's also problematic. So, see, there's traps all around here. But I can't just even give you the epistemic process because then you would have to believe me as to what the proper epistemic process is. No, you have to derive for yourself what the proper epistemic process is. How do you know what it is? Well, by questioning, by trusting nobody and then having your own insights. So one thing you should notice is that it's possible for you to question reality and then have legitimate understanding from that questioning. Legitimate insights. That's possible. How do you know that's possible? Because you've done it to a certain degree in your life. You've done it. Everyone has done that to a certain degree. You've figured stuff out. And you've also falsely tried to figure stuff out. That failed. But then you've had legitimate insights into how stuff works. Whether you were dating somebody and then you had some insight into them or into how dating works. Or you were doing business and you had some false ideas about business. But then you corrected those ideas. You observed how reality actually works, how business actually works. Then you had some insights into, this is how business actually, this is how you actually make money. You had some genuine insights. And that's different than just reading a book or being told by somebody how to make money. But now we're just taking that core questioning inquiry process and now we're expanding it and we're making it existential, right? It's not about relationships or getting laid or making money. Now it's about, why am I here? What is existence? How did we get here? What are the right and wrong ways to live, if there even are such things? What is the right epistemic process? What is truth? What is ultimate truth? And ultimately, truth is not about, again, it's not about concepts. It's not about having ideas of truth. It's about direct contact with reality. That's the purpose of genuine spirituality, is to put you in more direct contact with reality than you otherwise would be. The problem with beliefs and concepts, all the New Age stuff, past lives and chakras and astrology and all this kinds of stuff, the problem with all that stuff is that it takes you out. It's a layer between you and direct reality. Astrology is not a direct contact with reality. It's not. It's just not. Again, don't believe me, but actually investigate, question astrology, figure out what is astrology. Where does it come from? How do you know it's true? Is it a belief? Is it a concept? Is astrology direct experience? What is it? So identify what it actually is. Now you might say, well, astrology is just whatever I want it to be. No, it's not. There are right and wrong answers. So be careful with this kind of relativity where you think that, well, Leo, anything goes, whatever I believe a thing is, it's just how it is. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be this problem of illusion and self-deception. But there is a problem of illusion and self-deception. And again, if you don't believe me on that, investigate for yourself. That's an open question for you. Is it true that what Leo is saying is true, that self-deception is a serious problem for human beings? Is that true? Investigate. Is it true that astrology is concept? Investigate. Is it true that spirituality is about deconstructing illusions? Investigate. Another critical aspect now of genuine spirituality is it's about deconstructing the self. What is the self? The self is you. The thing I'm talking to. That's the self. You think you're a human being that was born is going to die. That's the self that we're talking about. It's your entire life story. Think about, you went to school, you had your first job, you had your first relationship, all of this, your personal history, and also your future, your ambitions, your personality, all that. So that whole thing is the self. But why would we want to deconstruct the self? Why would spirituality be about that? Well, because what drives all of your behaviors, all of your motivations, everything that you think, everything that you believe, everything you want out of life, and all the suffering you have, and all the pain you have, and everything you want to avoid, all of the tragedy in your life, what drives, what's at the center of all of that? If we're like looking at the psychology of it, it's all about you. It's all about the self. And of course, this is such a deep topic that I've discussed elsewhere, so I'm not going to go too deep into the self here, but in a nutshell, remember we talked about how the mind is making stuff up? Well, it's not just making stuff up. It's making up yourself, first and foremost. That's the most important thing it's making up. You were born, so to speak, and then you started making yourself up. You started constructing yourself. You started looking in the mirror and you said, oh, that's me, I'm in the mirror. And oh, I don't like my hair, I don't like my face, there's something wrong with me. And then you got this self-image now problem. It's like, oh, I got a weird face, I got a big nose, whatever. And then you went to school and you interacted with kids at school and then they laughed at you. And then now you got a belief that, oh, kids laugh at me because something's weird about how I talk or how I look. And then now you got that part of yourself, that insecure part. And then maybe you grew up and you're kind of short. So now you're insecure about that. That's a part of yourself. And then maybe you were very good at music. So now you got that part of yourself and you're like, oh, you're proud that you're so good at music. You're talented at music. And maybe that's true. But it's also a sort of an identity that you have now is like, you're a musician, maybe. And then you've got yourself now has ideas about itself and also the world. And so your sense of self is connected to how you view yourself, others, and the world. These are all interconnected. And how you construct yourself is very central to how you feel in life, your emotional state, your mental health, how you behave. Pretty much your whole life depends on how you've constructed yourself. And yourself can be constructed in very twisted and problematic ways, very illusory ways. You can have all sorts of fantasies about yourself. And this gets you into a lot of trouble, creates a lot of suffering and drama in your life. And there's various levels of development of the self. And so, in a sense, if we think about spirituality as about truth-seeking or understanding reality, why do we need to work on deconstructing the self? Because the self is the filter through which you see all of reality. So if you've constructed a certain limited kind of self, a twisted, dysfunctional kind of self, which most of us have to a certain degree, unless you've done a lot of work on yourself, then yourself is going to prevent you from seeing reality and getting to the truth. Because if what you have is an illusory self, a lot of fantasies about yourself, a lot of illusions about yourself, truth will hurt you very much, will cause you a lot of suffering. And so you're going to be in this dysfunctional relationship with reality, where on the one hand, you want the truth, you kind of need the truth. To be effective in the world, you need a certain degree of truth. Otherwise, you're going to, jump out the window thinking you can fly, sort of thing, in extreme kind of comical example. But there's a lot of ways where we get ourselves into trouble. And in fact, virtually all psychological problems come from a improper relationship with the truth because of a, twisted, traumatized self, fragmented self. And so psychology is all about, there's a quote from Abraham Maslow, which I've cited in the past, which I forget exactly how it goes, but I'm paraphrasing. It goes something along the lines of, all of therapy is simply about getting the client to confront the truth. That's all that therapy is at the end of the day. And the more dysfunctional the self one has constructed, the more difficult the therapy is, because the self is going to be so resistant and in such denial about all the illusions, right? Because the self, see, it's not just you've constructed a self, you're living this self. Your survival depends on this self that you've constructed. And so spirituality, genuine spirituality, is about getting over yourself, being free of a finite self, which involves a lot of self-reflection. So this distinguishes spirituality from people who are not spiritual. People who are not spiritual, they don't do a lot of deep self-reflection. Maybe if they're philosophers, and of course there's overlap between philosophy and spirituality. Ideally, there should be. If you're doing philosophy properly, it should overlap and actually become identical with spirituality at some point. But if you're not spiritual and you're not philosophical, then you're not very self-reflective, generally speaking. And then the problem when you're not self-reflective is that you're living out your illusions of a self rather than deconstructing and questioning it, right? So self-reflection is about questioning yourself. Spirituality is about questioning yourself so deeply that you realize that all of your ideas about yourself are not the truth, that they are limiting, that you are not actually the finite self, you're the infinite self. So the reason spirituality requires deconstructing the self is because to reach the ultimate truth, to be spiritual, to realize spirit, what is spirit? Spirit is the realization of the infinity of self. So in order to reach spirit, literally, you need to completely deconstruct yourself until you're gone. This requires years and decades of self-reflection. And this is the real work, the work of deconstructing yourself. This is difficult. And all of fake spirituality is about avoiding the deconstructing of the self, because of course the self doesn't want to be deconstructed. You might even ask, well, Leo, why deconstruct the self? We'll answer that a little bit later in this episode. Because you see, the problem is that people are so selfish that some people listening to this, when I say deconstruct the self, some of you guys are like really into this kind of stuff and you're like, yeah, deconstruct the self, awesome. But then for a lot of people, for most people, it's like, deconstruct the self, Leo, why would I want to do that? What's in it for me? What am I going to get for deconstructing the self? Well, this is very counterintuitive because, see, the self has a difficult time seeing this. What are you going to get? You're going to get the best possible outcome for deconstructing the self. What is that? You're going to be free of yourself. See, it's like, well, Leo, but why is that good? Well, see, there's an illusion that the self, that you need your finite self, and that the finite self is getting you all this stuff that you want. But what if that's an illusion? See, if you start to question yourself, you even start to question whether you even need a self, whether you even have a self. What is a self, after all? Can you find it? Has science found a self? And then you start to question, like, well, what is this self really doing for me? Let's do a cost-benefit analysis. How much am I really getting by being so selfish? And then you start to realize, of course, that there's a lot of negative stuff that comes from being this finite, limited, twisted, dysfunctional self that you've constructed. Sure, maybe it gets you money, maybe it gets you laid, maybe it gets you a great career. But then at the end of all that, you really have to ask yourself, well, okay, I got my money, I got my wife and my kids, and I got my career, and I got my fast car, and I live in a mansion, but I'm still miserable. Why? Okay, so see, there was an illusion, the illusion of happiness. See, you bought into the illusion that your culture sold you that if you're just going to get your mansion and your fast car and your hot wife and your kids, that you're going to be happy. But then once you got that, you realize, see, reality has disillusioned you. And now you're searching for answers. You go to therapy, you go for some spiritual guru to ask, how do I be happy? Why am I depressed? Why am I addicted? Why is money not making me happy? Why is fame not making me happy, and so forth? Why am I still angry and bitter, and why am I still an asshole, and why do my kids hate me? Right? So what I'm proposing to you is that the majority of your problems in life are directly related to how you've constructed yourself and the illusions you have about yourself, others, the world, and reality, and your relationship to all those things. So all of that needs to be questioned and rethought, because most people did not consciously construct these relationships and these ideas. They just absorbed them by osmosis from culture. looking at how other people do things. You see some rich friend, and then you just want to copy that rich friend. Or maybe your dad made $1 million, so now you want to make $1 million. Because you don't know any better. It's just, monkey see, monkey do. But then you start to reflect and you start to ask yourself, well, yeah, my dad did make $1 million, but then he became an alcoholic and he abused my family and he lost all his money in the end by being some gambler or something. So was that the right way to live? And more importantly, not just his behaviors, but I mean like his worldview. Did he have the right worldview about what humans are supposed to be doing in life, chasing millions of dollars? Is that the right way to live? See? So the problem with illusions, if you're just very selfish and you need a sort of an entry point in spirituality, well, the problem with your self is that it's creating a lot of suffering for you. Yourself is making you miserable. Consider the possibility that if you completely got rid of yourself, all of your worries and anxieties and misery would go away. All the drama, all the angst, all the negative emotions, all the suffering, it would all go away. So that's a pretty good reason to do spirituality, right? Spirituality promises you freedom from suffering. That's actually not the right way to do spirituality, but it's you got to start somewhere. For most people, that's a good place to start. But actually, that's a dysfunctional form of spirituality, which we'll discuss later why that is. Because really, true spirituality is about pure truth. It's the problem with doing spirituality to escape suffering is because even that is actually too selfish. You see how this works? Even by caring about your own suffering and wanting to escape it, that already is a demonstration of your selfishness. Because why are you doing it? Because you're just, you're selfish and you want to feel pleasant emotions. That's not a legitimate reason for doing spirituality. That's going to get you into problems. But that's a little bit beyond this kind of distinction that we're drawing here. So this brings us to the next issue, which is that genuine spirituality is about transcending survival. I'm not going to go too deeply into survival because it's such a deep topic and I have episodes. I have multiple episodes. I have Understanding Survival Part 1, Understanding Survival Part 2, How Survival Shapes Who You Are. That's another third episode. So I have a lot of episodes about survival. Go look at those. But survival is critical. Everything boils down to survival. Everything you're doing, everything your mind is doing, all the constructions it's doing, right? Your mind is not just constructing stuff willy-nilly for silly purposes. It's constructing stuff to aid your survival of a finite, twisted self that you are. So you're trying to survive illusions. See, it's not just that you have illusions, you are an illusion and you're trying to survive the illusion that you are and the illusions that you have. You're an illusion that has illusions and is trying to survive as an illusion and the illusions that it holds. And so genuine spirituality is about becoming more and more conscious of all of your survival dynamics. Everything you do, every emotion you have, every time you're happy, sad, feel pleasure, every time you suffer, every time you feel angry, every time you feel horny, all of that is survival. It's becoming conscious of why that is happening, what the purpose of all of that is, and how it's serving your selfish self, your finite self, and then undoing all of that, transcending all of that. It's about realizing that you're surviving unconsciously most of the time, as most people are, which makes you an animal. Unconscious survival is animal behavior. That's what an animal is. An animal is an unconscious survival machine. And that's what most human beings are. So what is the point of spirituality is to transform you from animal to human to what's beyond human? God. The more conscious you become of survival, the more you deconstruct your sense of self, you go from animal to human to God. There are a lot of humans on this planet who don't even deserve the title of human because they live like animals. They eat like animals. They have sex like animals. They relate to others as animals. They treat others like animals. They treat themselves like animals. They're addicted like an animal would. Then, as you develop more and you work on yourself and you become more conscious, you start to transcend that and you develop humanity. That's good. You develop some humanity, but then you realize that humanity is still very limited, and then you want to transcend humanity to God. And that requires deconstructing the self and deconstructing all of the cultural, social constructions as well. Mind is surviving by any means it can imagine, literally. Mind is always constructing conceptual illusions with bias to serve itself. Mind is always defending itself and defending its illusions. And so the job of spirituality is to get you to stop acting like an animal. Now, this connects with morality, because you might think morality is spirituality, right? Actually, wrong. Morality is a false form of spirituality. We'll talk more about that later, a little bit further in this episode, because that's a deep topic. But just quickly here, religion teaches you morality. Morality is a set of rules that kind of tell you how to act, more or less. There's different grades of morality. There's higher forms of morality. But, the lower forms are just rules that tell you how to act. Because most human beings are animals, and if you don't tell them how to act, they'll just behave like animals. So they need laws, and they need 10 commandments, and they need rules. They need some authority figure, some guru, to tell them how not to act. They need punishments and rewards. This is what animals need, right? Your dog. Your dog is not conscious enough to understand not to bite people. It has to be trained, like a dog, not to bite people. And so it is for most humans. That's how most children are taught, too. The problem with this morality, though, with these kinds of rules is that they're fundamentally unconscious. You're not actually applying consciousness to individual situations. You're just adopting rules and you're behaving mechanically, robotically. You're a little bit better than an animal, but you're still not very advanced. To be very advanced is to apply a live, active conscience in every situation, to consider all the relevant factors, to have a completely independent mind, no groupthink, no cultural norms, no human biases of any kind, no selfishness. Then you can apply pure consciousness, infinite consciousness, to every situation and then handle that situation in the best way that it's possible to handle that limited, finite situation. That would be sort of the pinnacle of morality, or what spirituality can take you to. Transcending survival means living beyond survival for metaphysical reality. Humans are utterly lost in survival. You can see that all around you. Again, don't believe me, but just look all around you. You're going to see humans lost in survival, utterly lost, and you're going to see yourself lost as well. But there's a higher way to live, right? You can live for sex and food and money and pleasure, raw pleasure, like a drug addict. That sounds kind of cool at first, until you realize you live that a bit for 5-10 years. You realize that all of that is an illusion. That's fool's gold. You can't have a good life this way. This is a recipe for a miserable life. And you see it. You see celebrities destroying their lives this way. They have all the money, all the fame, all the approval, and all the success, but they're miserable. Because all they've been doing is just surviving. They have it. So what's the alternative to survival? The alternative to survival is to live for metaphysical reality. What does that mean? It means, to give you just a little bit of sense of it, is it means to just live in appreciation of the beauty of existence itself, raw being. You're in contact with direct reality so deeply that you don't need drugs, you don't need heroin, you don't need sex, you don't need to earn $1 billion, you don't need a fancy yacht, you don't need to live in a mansion to be deeply satisfied with life. To be deeply satisfied, you can just sit here right now, nobody around, no entertainment, and you're just looking around and you're in awe at the beauty of existence and consciousness. Now, for many people, this is a fantasy. What I'm describing here is a fantasy. You would say, well, Leo, there's no way that this could compare to, getting a blowjob on a yacht with a hot girl or something like that. Well, that shows the level of development that you're at. Actually, believe it or not, you can be happier just sitting here being conscious of existence than you would getting a blowjob on a yacht. How do you get from there to here? Or from here to there? How do you get there? Well, that's what genuine spirituality will get you there. Fake spirituality will not get you there. Fake spirituality will have you chasing your tail, doing all sorts of stuff, believing in astrology and chakras and past lives and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're sitting alone at home and you're still miserable. Why? Because you've been doing fake spirituality. See, there's a difference between having beliefs and concepts and ideas and theories and stuff like that, reading a bunch of books. You can do all that. You can have an intellectual understanding of God and angels and all that shit. You can do all that. But at the end of the day, you cannot fool yourself in how you actually feel when you're sitting alone doing nothing. That's the ultimate test of your spirituality. How do you feel when you're sitting alone doing nothing? How connected are you to the present moment? How conscious are you of the magic of this moment right here, right now? Or are you lost in fantasies of the future? Do you need fancy vacations and luxury houses to be happy? So, fake spiritual people are not deeply conscious of their own survival. And furthermore, what they do is they turn spirituality into a survival pursuit. So, for example, I'm a New Age spiritual person, so, I got to go travel to some mystical place. I got to travel to ancient Egypt, to the pyramids, to be satisfied, to have a spiritual connection. Or I got to go to church. If I'm not at church, I don't have a spiritual connection. That's fake spirituality. Or I got to be surrounded by a bunch of friends having fun at a spa together or at some yoga retreat. And then I'm happy. Well, that's fake. See, that's fake spirituality. It's got the motions and the sort of performance of spirituality. You got spiritual ideas and spiritual people and spiritual talk. But there's not that direct connection and consciousness of reality. And then that is substituted and supplanted with all sorts of, we might call spiritual but material stuff. Like going on fancy vacations and living in luxury, needing friends and lovers to give you love, right? So here's another form of fake spirituality is expecting to feel love all the time by being showered with love by other spiritual people. See, the self is so sneaky. The self is going to come up with any way imaginable to get the sort of fruits of spiritual work without actually doing the spiritual work. Because when you're doing real spiritual work, it's eroding the self. That's very threatening to the self. It's uncomfortable. Real spiritual work is difficult. Whereas the fake spiritual work, it's fun and exciting. I can go to Burning Man, I can do some LSD, smoke some weed, have a threesome at Burning Man, and that gets me to feel like super spiritual and groovy. But then at the end of the day, I come home and it's like, oh man, I'm back home, all alone. Now I'm depressed. And I'm horny. And I'm dissatisfied because, one of my girlfriends broke up with me because she didn't love my other girlfriend, sort of thing. And, I wanted to have 2 girlfriends. I wanted 3 girlfriends, and I can't figure out how to get all 3 of them to work together and to all love me. And they're all very spiritual. So, I'm going to plan a vacation to the Amazon jungle, and we're going to do ayahuasca together, and we're all going to have a foursome together, and it's all going to work out. And now let me hatch this scheme of, let me plan this expensive vacation to the Amazon rainforest. I'm going to pay $10,000 and we're going to get luxury accommodations and a luxury hut for each one of my girlfriends. And then we're going to, this, and then I'm going to hire the best shaman in the Amazon. And he's going to give me some ritual and some mantra. And he's going to tell me about my past lives that, I was a king in the ancient Egypt, and then my girlfriend was a queen, and, the divine masculine and divine feminine, and, we're this twin flame, twin threesome relationship sort of thing going on, right? So that's all fun and exciting, but it's avoidance of the real work. These are elaborate spiritual illusions, right? So there's different kinds of illusions. There's secular illusions. Maybe you have some illusions about how business works and it just doesn't work that way. Or you have illusions about, politics and it doesn't work that way. Like communism might be a secular illusion, we might say. And then you can have spiritual illusions. Spiritual illusions are a lot of the religious stuff and a lot of the New Age stuff, spiritual illusions. And then genuine spirituality is about transcending all illusions. So here's another way to frame it for you. Consider this. You are a slave inside your own dream. Spirituality is how to break free of mental slavery. Genuine spirituality. You are a slave by your own emotional attachments. You do not even know that you are a slave because you are a slave to culture. And culture tells you that you're free. When your slavery is pointed out to you, you deny it, which is what keeps you enslaved. You've fallen in love with your own mental enslavement, and you're inventing fake spirituality to maintain your enslavement. Because you would rather be a spiritual slave together with other spiritual slaves than to truly be free and alone. Now, my question to you is, if that's true, analyze that. Is that true for you? If that's true, what would be required to break free of this mental slavery? Well, whatever that is, to truly break free of it, that would be genuine spirituality. So I encourage you to sit and just to kind of think, if I was a mental slave and my culture was keeping me mentally enslaved, and furthermore, much of the New Age spirituality within my culture is also keeping me enslaved, okay, what would I have to do to break free of all that? And then make a list. And as you're making that list, notice that your mind is supplying you with genuine answers and insights. Now, of course, some of those could be wrong. You'll discover that later in the future. You'll test how true, your mind's answers were. Some of them could be wrong, but some of them could probably be right. And you'll also discover that by applying it. See, you go out there, you apply the stuff that your mind supplied you with, and then you see, did it work out or not? Did it make you more of a slave or less of a slave? And then, of course, you keep doing that. And then this is how you discover the true spiritual process without believing me. Because if you believed me, that would just be a recapitulation of all the problems that I'm talking about. Genuine spirituality is about achieving complete sovereignty of mind. Sovereignty of mind. I have an episode that touches on this called How Authority Works. I'm going to have more in the future about sovereignty of mind and its importance. But basically what's happening is that as your mind is developing, it's developing more sovereignty. The problem is that when you're born, your mind has very little sovereignty. What does that mean? It means that basically you're going to believe whatever any authority tells you. People tell you stuff, you just believe it and you just do it. Your parents tell you stuff, you do it. You don't question it. Your religious pastor tells you stuff, you just do it. Scientists tell you stuff, you just believe it, accept it. Politicians tell you stuff, you just accept it. You fit in. This is social survival. This is the easiest way to survive for a human being. And in many cases, it's necessary when you're young until you've developed your own, way of surviving in the world. That's, independent of all that. But so see, the mind starts out very conformist. As you're developing the mind, what are you really doing when you're developing the mind? You're developing autonomy. The mind is able to think truly for itself the more you develop it. And you start to see through and you start to question. The more you question, the more inquiry you do, the more truth-seeking you do, the more illusions you break. You start to see that the entire social domain is illusions. You start to see that all the ideas that culture and your parents and your teachers and your pastors and scientists and politicians have fed into your minds, all of this is illusions. You start to deconstruct all of that, and then your mind expands and it becomes more free, more open. You're able to think in creative new ways that you were not able to think before. Also, you deal with your emotional baggage and trauma and shadow stuff that you're able to think new kinds of thoughts that you wouldn't have been able to even think when you were younger because you were so bogged down by, emotional traps. What do I mean by emotional traps? Well, like you need love and approval from this group of friends that you have. And so you can't think certain thoughts Because if you thought those thoughts, you would no longer fit in with your group, your friend group, and then they would ostracize you and ridicule you and maybe shame you or whatever, and then you would feel so bad about it, and you need their love. You're not autonomous with love, so you can't break free of them. You can't think certain thoughts because it would destroy your social relationships, for example. And a lot of that is because you're so emotionally needy. Like, you need love, you need approval from other people, you need other people to think well of you. You're so attached to what everybody thinks of you. You haven't developed that autonomy of mind. So genuine spirituality is about breaking free of that. As you break free of that, you start to suffer less. There's less drama in your life. You start to become more creative. You start to look at reality in radically new ways. This allows you to take new perspectives on reality, much higher, more advanced, sophisticated, more nuanced perspectives. And as you're doing this, you're able to see reality more truly for what it is, until eventually you reach such a high level of mental autonomy that you finally achieve absolute sovereignty of mind. And why is that important? Because that's what God is. God is not a bearded man in the clouds. God is not Jesus. God is your mind realizing its absolute sovereignty. When you realize absolute sovereignty of mind, you realize that your mind is constructing everything and everyone. Remember, we said that everything is an illusion? Well, to realize that everything is an illusion, you'd have to take responsibility that you're imagining the whole universe. That would require you to realize absolute sovereignty of mind. When you realize that your mind is God's mind. That is the moment of your God realization, your awakening. That is the pinnacle of the spiritual pursuit. Your mind develops such infinite requisite variety that it's able to think so creatively that literally you're able to see how you're hallucinating entire people and worlds into existence. That's why sovereignty of mind is so critical. Because the average person, look, if I tell the average person off the street that you hallucinated your own mother, they would laugh at me, they would ridicule me, and they would never believe that. If I tell a scientist that the moon, that you're imagining the moon is a construct of your own mind, he would laugh at me and think that I'm some kind of religious nutcase or something. But the truth is that everything is your own hallucination. You are imagining the moon, and you are imagining your own mother. And so the more truth-seeking you do, the more you'll realize that that's true. But you're going to have to face that, right? That's difficult to face. People don't want to face that. People don't want to admit, they don't want to take responsibility for the fact that they're imagining the whole universe. Because they want somebody to blame. Because that's frightening. Because they want someone to tell them what's true, right? Absolute sovereignty of mind means you can't rely on anybody to tell you what's true. And then to achieve this kind of sovereignty of mind, you need to realize that everybody is lost in culture. You need to transcend being lost in culture. That's going to take you a couple decades of work. Genuine spirituality is not just about psychology, it transcends that. It goes into the existential terrain. Traditional psychology is not deep enough to be spirituality. Although if you do psychology properly eventually, because psychology is the study of mind, psyche is mind, psychology, study of mind, well, the whole universe is your mind. Everything is your mind. So in a sense, psychology is the study of everything, which is just also spirituality is also in a sense the study of everything, the realization that you are everything. Right? But you need to take psychology to an existential level. So it's not just about like, oh, I have certain psychological problems. I have a relationship problem, or I have a, why am I addicted to food, or, whatever. Why can't I lose 10 pounds? Why do I have problems with my boyfriend? Why do I have problems with money? Why do I have self-image problems? Like I'm not, I have body dysmorphia. I don't like how I look. I need plastic surgery, this kind of stuff. And even after I get my Botox, I still don't like how I look. So I need to get even more. Regular psychology helps address some of these, severe mental dysfunctions. But see, that's not enough. It's not enough for you to just remove your mental dysfunctions because your problem is existential. It's not just psychological. Your problem is at the identity level of who you think you are, the self you've constructed. You have to deconstruct the human self. You have to deconstruct humanity. You have to even deconstruct psychology, because psychology is a human construction too. Don't forget that. As all science is, you have to deconstruct science. All right, so existential, you got to go deeper and deeper. You got to question existentially. This is also what makes it different than science. Science does not do serious existential questioning. It's superficial. Science does not address the substance of anything. Science is very pragmatic, utilitarian. I've addressed this issue of science in other episodes, Deconstructing the Myth of Science, part 1, 2, 3. So it's got to be existential. Now let's talk a little bit about why religion is wrong. So religion is fake spirituality. Why? Please don't believe me on that. Contemplate for yourself, come to your own conclusions. But just, contemplate. For example, why is Mormonism wrong? Why are Jehovah's Witnesses wrong? Why are fundamentalist Christians wrong? Why are fundamentalist Muslims wrong? Because what they do is they give you answers. These answers are not a genuine inquiry into the nature of truth and reality. That's why, fundamentally. They tell you stuff to believe. They're mental constructions. They are not teachings of the meta kind. They do not teach you epistemology. They do not teach you critical distinctions for how to distinguish, for example, belief versus concept versus direct experience. They don't teach you this stuff. They don't teach you distinctions between legitimate and illegitimate spirituality. Well, they do, but the problem is that it's corrupted. They combine spirituality with survival. Religion is mostly about serving human survival. A lot of human bias in it. It's beliefs and speculations and ideas, and it's indoctrination. It is not facilitation. That's the key difference, indoctrination versus facilitation. Facilitation is, like I said before, is using a kind of Socratic method to help a mind realize its own sovereignty. Religion makes it impossible for a mind to realize its absolute sovereignty, and because of this, a mind cannot realize that it's God. So religion is absolutely antithetical to the realization of God, paradoxically. Which is why virtually no religious person understands that they are God, that their mind is God. Because religion didn't give them the tools, the techniques, or the insights necessary to do this. And that's because nobody in the religion understands what genuine spirituality is. See, you're assuming someone who joins a religion or a church assumes that the people in the church know what they're talking about and they know the difference between legitimate and illegitimate spirituality. They don't. That's just an assumption you had as a kid. Nobody at a church knows what genuine spirituality is. Again, don't believe me. Go check. Go to your local church, talk to them, interrogate them, ask them all sorts of skeptical questions about God, about angels, about beliefs, about concepts. Just go to your local church and ask them to tell you the difference between a concept and direct experience, whether they just even know that distinction. And have the preacher explain to you, for example, what is the importance of direct experience over concepts? What's the problem with concepts? Have him explain epistemology to you. Ask him, for example, what is epistemology and what is the importance of epistemology towards genuine spirituality? Ask him that question. Ask them the question, for example, how do you guys in your religion, let's say you go to a Christian church, you say, how do you guys deal with the problem of bias in your belief system and in your worldview? How do you deal with human bias? How do you deal with Christian bias? Tell me what epistemic steps have you taken? What epistemic process are you using to clear out the biases from your own mind and the mind of this congregation? You ask them these kind of questions, they're going to look at you with a dumb face because nobody has ever asked them these questions. They have no idea what these words mean, what these concepts mean, what the significance of any of this stuff is. Ask them the difference between indoctrination and facilitation. Ask, for example, how is this congregation avoiding indoctrination of children and instead facilitating them in a genuine truth-seeking process, unbiased in any way, not telling them what to believe, what to think, but a genuine facilitation into truth-seeking. By the way, what is truth-seeking? Ask them that. What are the criteria for truth-seeking? How do you know you're seeking truth? And then, of course, you ask them, what is truth? And by that, I don't mean tell me what the truth is. I mean, what is truth itself? Of course, you're not going to have those answers because they've never done genuine spirituality. What they've been doing in this church is they've been cosplaying. They spent 20, 30, 40 years of their life cosplaying, and now they're so deeply bought into the cosplay with the costumes and the religious hats and the crosses and the hymns and the stained glass windows, all of this frippery, all of this window dressing. All of that was just to avoid deconstructing the self and the mind to realize that this whole thing is an illusion and that they are God dreaming up the universe. That's the difference. That's why religion is wrong. Spirituality is not about worshiping anything, and it's certainly not about worshiping anything human like Jesus. Spirituality is about building a deep relationship with truth and reality directly. You want a direct interface with existence, with the present moment. Not ideas, not human constructs, not illusions, raw, direct experience. Take your hand right now, look at your hand. Just stare at your hand. This experience of just staring directly at your hand. Now compare that to, close your eyes for a second if you're not driving, close your eyes if you can. And now imagine an image of your hand. And now go back and forth and just compare. Compare the image in your mind's eye of your hand versus looking at your hand. And just go back and forth like this. Look at your hand, then close your eyes and imagine your hand. And go back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth, until you realize that your hand has more reality than the image of your mind, of the hand in your mind. And that all of your Christian stuff, all of your Muslim stuff, all of your past lives, and all of the New Age stuff, that those are all like the mind, the hand in your mind. They are not the real thing. They are not direct experience. And so all that spirituality is putting you more in touch with your hand, literally with your hand. That's all that it is. The problem is like, well, Leo, but I want something magical and mystical. You see, this is the problem. This is where fake spirituality comes from, is that you want something magical and mystical. You want something that serves your ideas, serves your emotional needs. Because when you're sitting here looking at your hand, it's like, well, oh man, Leo, that's boring. That's boring. This isn't magical and mystical. There's nothing spiritual about my hand. It's like, well, Leo, I don't need you for that. I didn't need you to talk to me for 3 hours to tell me to look at my hand. I could have done that on my own. Well, the problem is that you're not doing it on your own, though, are you? You're looking for fantasy and angels and aliens and past lives. You're looking for this kind of stuff. You're looking for God out there in the clouds. You're not looking for God right here. Because God couldn't be right here, could it? No, of course not. You're looking for somebody to worship. You're looking for an image of Jesus. What is Jesus? See, look. Christians are so fucking stupid that they don't even understand what Jesus is. You can walk into any church and just ask them, what is Jesus? And they won't be able to tell you. Jesus is a concept in your mind. That's all that Jesus is. It's a concept in your mind. They don't understand that. That's the difference between real and fake spirituality. Spirituality is about consciousness. Consciousness. It's about becoming ever more conscious until you become infinitely conscious to the point where you're so conscious that you realize that you are God hallucinating the universe and everybody in it. And then the question becomes, well, how do I increase my consciousness? And then the question becomes, well, what is obstructing my consciousness? Anything that is obstructing consciousness is, by definition, then, not spiritual. Or maybe we could say, I don't want to say it's not spiritual because everything is spiritual, but like what I mean is more like it's a fake kind of spirituality. For example, when you spend, rather than spending like you have finite time and finite energy, and your mind gets easily distracted, right? So, for example, you could spend the next 3 years building a fancy church, a luxurious church with beautiful modern architecture, stained glass windows, and then you could gather a group of 20 friends to go out to supermarkets across your city, canvassing for donations because you need $1 million to build this fancy church, right? You could invest 3 years of your life doing this, and at the end of that, you'll have a fancy, beautiful stained glass window church. But will your consciousness of reality be any higher? No. So in this sense, constructing this church was an obstacle to raising your consciousness because that's an opportunity cost. You could have taken that time and you could have spent 3 years on the cushion meditating. And if you did that for 3 years, I guarantee you your consciousness would be so much higher that you wouldn't even care about churches. You wouldn't care about money. And you wouldn't care about your community of stupid friends. Right? So instead of doing the hard work of sitting on a cushion for 3 years, you spent that building a fancy church. Why did you do that? Because you were under some illusion that this is the right way to do spirituality, that this is going to get you closer to God. God wants a fancy church, right? God wants stained glass windows. Or does he? How do you know? Well, that's something you inquire, right? You inquire, what does God want? Does God want anything? So you sit down, you want to do some genuine spirituality, sit down and honestly ask yourself, what are all the things that I'm doing in my life that are obstructing my consciousness? The raising of my consciousness. For example, I'm addicted to food, and I'm addicted to going to nightclubs and looking for girls. And, I'm addicted to shopping for fancy cars on the internet. I spend days and days shopping for cars or looking at pornography. Or, I'm very preoccupied at work. I don't just work a normal job. I work extra hard. I work, 60, 80 hours a week because I want to advance my corporate job in marketing and market more. That means I have to market more and find clever ways to market more stuff to more people, And last month I found a very clever way to market some dick pills on Facebook. And that got me a promotion at work. Okay. So this is all the stuff you're doing. But as you're doing all that, ask yourself, how is selling dick pills increasing my consciousness? Oh, it's not. Oh, okay. So then that's useless. That's not spiritual. Okay. So I can what if I eliminate that and I invest that time into doing something that will raise my consciousness? Well, what would that be? Well, then you see, I don't need to tell you, you can go research that for yourself. I mean, look, these days we have AI. You can literally just go to Google and type, what are some things that genuinely increase people's consciousness? And then AI will tell you, Google will tell you, meditation, contemplation, retreats, maybe psychedelics, maybe some vision quest thing, maybe, a hot sauna, I don't know, whatever, cold plunge, whatever. And now, well, how do you know which one of those are true? And maybe it tells you a false one too. Maybe it tells you something like, going to church will raise your consciousness. Well, is that true? How do you know? Well, you don't believe me. You go out, and you don't believe Google either. You go out and you test it. Go to church for a week and see, did it raise your consciousness? Oh, it didn't? Okay. Well, then now you know not to do that anymore. Did you go do a cold plunge and increase your consciousness? Maybe you did. Okay, well then keep doing your cold plunges and see how that works for you. And then try different things and see, well, of the things that I've been trying over the last year, maybe you found 2 or 3 that raised your consciousness. Well, then you ask yourself, well, which one is raising my consciousness more? And then you take all your chips and you bet it on that. And you keep exploring and you keep looking for new techniques. And you buy books and you read those books. I have many on my book list. I have over 50 spiritual books on my book list that will, share various techniques for you. You can test those out. Yeah, it's laborious. See, this is real work. This is real work. This is not beliefs. This is not intellectual. You have to actually go do this stuff, see what works for you. And look, I don't know what's going to work for you. Maybe because everybody's different and unique, have different personalities. Maybe for you, a cold plunge is going to lead you to God. I don't know. I doubt it, but you have to test stuff. You don't know what's going to work for you. So look, I'm giving you a process. See how different this is from going to church. And then at church, if I was a preacher at church, I would just tell you that Jesus died for your sins and then you got to worship Jesus and be like Jesus. That's very different from I gave you an investigative process. And then your own experience is going to supply you with the answers. Your own contact with reality. See, my job is to push you out of your illusions into raw reality. And then, of course, your ego's job is to invent excuses for not to do that. Why? Because the ego wants to survive. And if you do what I'm telling you, if I'm able to successfully push you all the way into raw reality, your ego will disappear. So that's the game that's being played here. Notice this interesting, strange, loopy sort of twist is that the process of transcending illusion and corruption itself becomes illusion and corruption. The ego turns the spiritual process into a self-serving fantasy and concept. Because the ego only knows one thing, how to survive. The ego doesn't know anything else. So every word that I tell you is filtered through your ego, and then your ego cleverly twists and distorts and selectively cherry picks the things that I say in such a way to frame them in your mind such that your worldview does not get deconstructed, and then your ego becomes safe and it can, live a little bit longer. And you can keep being a little bit more selfish. That's the game that's being played here. So you have to be just very, very honest and ruthless with yourself about what is genuine about your spiritual process. Because we all have some kind of spiritual process. And then the self-deception goes so deep that the self-deception, of course, the most important thing to deceive yourself about is the spiritual process itself. Because if you can deceive yourself about that, then you can be self-deceived forever till you die, and your ego will be happy in that sense. Which is why all religion is so corrupt. Religion is supposed to get you to God, except it's been so corrupted that it'll do exactly the opposite. That's its function. Its function is to prevent you from realizing that you're God. One of the most important things I can impart to you is, this is the value of what I can teach you, is just understanding what the real process is versus all of the human bullshit and confusion. Very few human beings understand this difference. I can teach it to you because I'm one of the few people who understands it. Why do I understand it? Because since a very young age, since I was a teenager, I truly, deeply cared about truth. That doesn't mean all my ideas are correct, or that I've never made mistakes, or that all my beliefs are true, or that my worldview is is perfect or that I haven't, had wrong ideas in the past or whatever. Doesn't mean any of that. It just means exactly what I said. I have a deep, genuine care for truth. And you might say, well, so what? So does everybody, right? No, but not everybody. It took me 30 years of life. Well, more like 40 years, actually. It took me 40 years of life just to appreciate how few people genuinely care about truth. Because everybody claims that their worldview is true. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuinely caring about truth, doing the work to inquire and seek for truth. Very few human beings do that. And so those of us who do, the most valuable thing we can offer to the world is just that standard, just that principle of genuinely caring about truth. As opposed to what? As opposed to survival. That doesn't mean I don't care about survival. It's just that I've handled my survival enough to the point where I can devote my whole life to truth. And again, not to say that I'm perfect at it. I'm not always truthful. Don't get me wrong. Be careful not to create a fantasy about me either. Your ability to discern real from fake spirituality is corrupted by social conditioning. The reason people are so fooled is because they trust what society around them tells them, what some subculture tells them, and they don't question it. So, how do you know that what I'm saying, everything I'm saying up to this point is true? Well, you contemplate and you investigate. You ask yourself the following questions. What distinguishes real spirituality from fake spirituality? Contemplate that. Contemplate also, what is real spirituality? What is its point? Why do spirituality at all? Contemplate what is the core common thread among all the different spiritual traditions and teachings. What's the core thing that all of them are about? If there's anything real there at all. Contemplate what are distractions from spiritual work. Contemplate why. Why are there so many distractions from spiritual work? What's the point of that? Contemplate what corrupts spiritual work. And contemplate why is spirituality corrupted? For what purposes? So nobody wants to do the epistemic process of rigorous inquiry from scratch. People want answers, they want beliefs, they want concepts, they want stories. They want fantasies and they want magic. They want tradition, they want community, they want to socialize. They want pleasure, they want to feel good. They want their emotional needs satisfied. They want human stuff and they want it to look godly and magical and spiritual. This is the problem. Notice that all of that is different from truth-seeking. Truly, this is a difference. Notice when you're doing this and notice when you're truth-seeking. And notice it in others as well. The next point is that real spirituality cannot be about tradition nor community. People get this wrong as well. People turn spirituality into a defending of a tradition, upholding of a tradition, whether it's a yogic tradition, even a non-dual Vedantic tradition. I've seen that. Of course, Christians are all about tradition, Jews, and who else? I mean, even Buddhists do this kind of stuff. Tradition. And why can't it be about tradition? Because notice this, all tradition is a human invention. Humans invented tradition. Before there were humans, there was no tradition. This is pretty obvious, right? You can see this. Before Christianity, there was reality and truth. There was God before Christianity. Long before Christianity, there was God. So clearly the Christian tradition cannot be fundamental to God or to reality, or to consciousness, or to truth, or to humanity, or to life, because all of these things existed long before Christianity, and they will exist long after Christianity expires. Likewise with Buddhism or any other tradition. Tradition is a human invention. Furthermore, no tradition is direct experience. Notice that as well, because all tradition depends upon ideas of the past. The past is conceptual and the past is imaginary. So that's something you need to realize. Right? You don't know anybody who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. You don't know what their real biography is. You don't know what kind of corruption they had in them. You don't know how pure or impure their mind was. You don't know what kind of evil they did. You have no idea of their true character. You cannot distinguish this from the myths that humans have invented. All ideas about people who lived in the past, these are all myths, even if there is historical evidence, which there really is not very good historical evidence of Jesus or Buddha. There literally is no hard historical evidence. All you have are stories from human beings. You have words and writings. So all words are a human invention. Language is a human invention. And all of history is a human story, human invented story. Cherry-picked, biased, highly sanitized, whitewashed, exaggerated, could be entirely fictional. Why are you believing that? None of that has anything to do with direct experience. Spirituality is about direct experience, not ideas of the past. God exists right here, right now, not in the past. It has nothing to do with the past. Now you might say, well, Leo, but there's some really good techniques that we need to preserve from the past. How do you know? How do you know they're good techniques? The only way you could know is if you actually did the spiritual work and realized what God is. And then once you realize what God is, then you're in a position to judge what is and isn't a good technique. I'm in that position. Maybe a few of you are in that position, but the most of you are not in that position. So also look and investigate, why are you attached to a position? Why are you attached to Christianity? Why? Do a genealogy, trace it back and look at where did this tradition come from. Notice that you have a mental attachment to it. Notice that you have an emotional attachment to it. What is that about? What is going to happen if you throw away that tradition? What are you afraid of? See, this is real inner work. This is real self-inquiry, self-reflection. Why are you defending ideas that people in the past have come up with that you haven't even tested? You don't know. Have you experienced God? Have you met Jesus? Then you don't know. You don't know if these techniques work. Now you say, well, Leo, I did experience Jesus. It's even more complicated than that, because what you think you experienced as Jesus could also be an illusion. Just because you call something Jesus doesn't mean it is. Doesn't mean that it has any connection whatsoever to the historical Jesus. The historical Jesus could have been Satan for all you know. You don't know. And now you're just blindly defending this tradition. The entire Christian tradition could be Satanism in disguise. After all, don't you believe as a Christian that the Satan is very crafty and clever, very intelligent? And that what is the Satan's goal? Isn't the Satan's goal to deceive people and to mislead them and to seduce them away from God? Well, just think about it for a second. If you were Satan, what would be the best way to do your work on earth? It would be to go into the Christian church, corrupt the church, and turn the church into spiritual nonsense that just gets people lost in fantasy and concepts, believing in traditions, blindly defending a tradition that they have no experience with. And then that's it. You got them. You fooled millions of people. Billions of people have been fooled for thousands of years. That's the perfect satanic plan. How do you know that's not true? Well, you don't know that. Also, real spirituality cannot be about community. Why not? Because the entire social domain is an illusion and a construction. But that's going to take a lot of inner work, a lot of consciousness work for you to realize that. You don't even know if other people are real. See, you're so caught up in community. You want community, but it never even occurred to you to question, are other people real or are they illusions? If they're illusions, then why am I taking their love and their approval and so seriously? Why do I need them? If you're doing genuine existential inquiry, you're going to reach a point where you have to ask yourself, okay, community. Could community be an illusion? How could community be an illusion? Let's think about that. And then you go into a deep skepticism about the reality of community. See, that would be real work. But of course, that's not as fun as going to Burning Man and, taking some LSD and meeting Jesus and meeting, the Buddha and stuff like that while you're having your threesome. Not as fun. The problem with community is that to join a community, you have to buy into and accept all of their biases and their collective survival. See, every community, it's not about truth-seeking. Communities are always about collective survival, first and foremost. I don't care if it's a university, a corporation, a church, a group of people at Burning Man. They're not there for truth. Nobody goes to Burning Man for truth. They go to Burning Man for fun, for a vacation, for sex, for partying, for tripping. Tripping is nice. I'm not saying there's not spiritual value to tripping, but of course there's a lot of delusion that comes with it as well, especially when you do it at a place like Burning Man. If you wanted to trip seriously, you wouldn't do it at Burning Man because that's just crazy chaos and distraction. It would distract you from truth seeking. If you want to do a serious trip, you go rent a motel room and do it alone in a motel room. You're at Burning Man for fun, not for truth. That's the truth. See, if you were honest, spirituality is also about radical self-honesty. Like, just investigate why you're doing the spiritual stuff that you're doing. Why? Why are you talking about past lives? Just investigate. Why are you doing that? You have some emotional need to talk about it. Why are you into astrology? You have some emotional need for that. You have an emotional need to pay a bunch of money to go to Burning Man or to go to church. Investigate that. Right? So spirituality is also about transcending humanity, transcending your human self. Because in order to realize God, you have to transcend being human. Humanity is the obstacle, literally the obstacle, the biggest obstacle to God is humanity. So when you're socializing and joining these communities, what's happening is that they're distracting you into doing human stuff. There's a lot of human drama that goes on once you join a community. It's all about communal survival. It's not about truth-seeking. It becomes political very quickly once you get a group of 10, 20 people together or more. It becomes political very quickly. People start to join alliances. It becomes tribal, us versus them sort of thing. It's your community against another community sort of thing. And it becomes groupthink. You have to start to believe what they believe. Why? Because if you don't, there's going to be friction and tension and they're going to kick you out. And if you do bring serious truth-seeking into any community, they're going to kick you out. Why? Because you're going to be questioning all of their survival agendas, all of their biases. Whether it's a Christian community or a Buddhist community, it doesn't matter. New Age community. Because if you're genuinely questioning everything, you're going to have to question that community too. And do you think they're going to like that? No, of course they're not. Because the community is based on fantasies, and they want those fantasies preserved. That's the function of the community, is to preserve those fantasies. Which, of course, is why I don't build a community. Have you noticed that? That's not an accident. People accuse me of being a cult leader. I'm extremely careful not to build any kind of community. Now, some people will say, well, Leo, you have your forum. That's like a community. No, it's really not. I mean, it's like the thinnest possible thing I could make that is sort of like a community. Because, humans are social creatures. You can't avoid community entirely. And by the way, be careful here. I am not telling you not to socialize or have relationships or have sex or go to Burning Man or have a community or join a community, be part of some community. I mean, these things are inevitable, in a certain sense necessary, and not a problem. What I am talking about is conflating that with spirituality. See, that's the problem. Because people will accuse me now. See, some guy will come in here and say, "Oh, Leo, well, you're just like a hermit. You're telling everybody to be so antisocial, and that's unhealthy." No. Don't get me wrong. By all means, go out, party, go to nightclubs, have sex, go to Burning Man, have your threesomes and foursomes, go to an orgy. I don't care. Honestly, get it out of your system. Do it. Do all that stuff. But here's what you should not do. Do not call that stuff spiritual. Be honest with yourself about why you're doing that stuff. You're doing that stuff because you're horny, you're lonely, you want fun, you want excitement, you're a human, you want to socialize. Great. I have those desires and needs as well. I do some socializing. I have sex. I go to a nightclub sometimes. I don't mind going to Burning Man. I haven't gone, but at some point I probably want to go just for the fun of it, to see like a vacation. But look, I'm not fooling myself that I'm going to Burning Man for truth. Right? And when I'm having sex, I'm not fooling myself that I'm this is my soulmate and all this bullshit. And in a past life, we were soulmates for 1,000 years. And that now I'm expressing my divine masculine, whatever. Like, I'm not doing that, right? Just have sex and admit to yourself that you're just a horny animal having sex. Fine. Do it. Fine. So I don't build a community because I don't want collective survival to corrupt my teachings. I don't want to have a staff that I have to pay, because every person I hire that I have to pay, now I'm incentivized, like, well, okay, now I got to earn more money. Now Actualized.org becomes about earning more money to pay my staff. And then what happens if I'm not earning enough money? Well, now I have to start to think about, okay, what kind of sponsors can I find? Oh, what kind of tricks and how can I get more money out of you? And then it becomes about, I'm spending more time thinking about how to market to you and how to make more money to pay my staff than I'm thinking about the truth of the material that I'm publishing. I could make a lot more money if I did start a community, because the bigger a community I have, the more I can milk them for money. And also, the more appealing it is to you. Because if I have some sexy community and I'm posting on Instagram that, next week we're going to Burning Man, and then we're going to Egypt, and then we're going this place, and then we're doing this thing, and then we're going to the Amazon, and we're all going to trip together, and we're going to do this and that, and it's all about love, man. It's all about love. See, if I do this, I can get 5,000 of you to pay me hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars to join this kind of community. And then once you're a part of it and you're enjoying it and you're having fun, then I can start selling you merchandise, and I can start selling you this and that vacation and this sponsorship and this kind of thing. So real commitment to spirituality and to truth is about being like ruthless about the distractions. Ruthless about distractions. There are so many possible distractions here. I'm going to give you a whole list in a minute of all the distractions, but we've already touched on a few. Real spirituality is a profound not knowing of being. It's not about faith and more beliefs and ideas. It's about letting that go. It's exactly the opposite. It's about the less you know, man, I'll just tell you, I've been reaching such profound states of not knowing lately that I'm driving in my car. Yesterday, I was driving in my car for an hour. I was just driving around in the middle of the night, just contemplating. And I'm driving for an hour, and I'm letting go of all of my ideas. Look, I'm a very intellectual person. I'm a very conceptual person. You know how many theories and models and ideas and spiral dynamics and this and that I've talked about, right? Over the last decade with you. But when I'm driving in the car, I completely let all of that go, so much so that I don't even know that I'm driving a car anymore. I'm like, something is happening here, but I'm in such a profound mystery of what's happening. You might think, well, Leo has everything figured out, right? He has all these models and ideas and he knows exactly what everything is. It's like, no, it's the opposite of that. When I'm driving alone in my car, I don't even know what a car is. And even deeper than that, I don't even know what I am. So I'm driving in the car and I'm thinking like, what am I? As I'm driving, like, what am I? And I don't know what I am. It's like, yes, I know I'm God, but I don't know what that really means, right? So I'm driving in this deep mystery. Now, is that always the case for me? No. Of course, at the same time, I also still have a worldview and I still have certain beliefs and stuff. I still believe the earth is round, but you know, I'm even getting to the point of letting that go. Like, honestly, the most advanced spirituality is letting go as much of that shit as possible. Because that puts you, why? Because it puts you into direct contact with the present moment. And that's as close to truth as you get. Even your belief, when you're driving in your car, the belief that you're driving on a round earth, that's already disconnecting you from reality. Because that is not something you actually know when you're driving in that car. That's some kind of conclusion you came to because somebody told you something that you're trusting, right? That's removed from direct experience. So I want you to notice that almost nobody teaches real spirituality. It's truly extremely rare. Because real spirituality is threatening and it's not marketable. And it requires very serious people to do it. Less than 1 in 1,000 people are serious enough to do real spirituality. They're not mature enough. They're not at a point in their life. They're too wrapped up in personal drama and baggage and their emotional needs and their need for socializing and sex and money and all of that. They're so wrapped up in that they can't even fathom why somebody would want to do this kind of deconstruction. And even those people, those yogis and so forth, there are certain people who teach pretty good spirituality, like, you know, they've had awakenings and so forth. But even a lot of them are still quite conformist. They're still teaching from a certain tradition. They're still bringing cultural bias into it. There's corruptions in it. And look, I'm not saying that I don't do some of that as well. I got my biases. I got some corruption as well. I'm not expecting any teacher out there to be perfect. But I just want you to really appreciate and to learn how to distinguish the serious teachers from the fluff. And when you find a really serious teacher, like, appreciate that. And I'm not talking about myself. There's others out there. Really appreciate that. Take it seriously. Don't get distracted by the fluff. And if you haven't found a teacher like that, keep looking. Keep looking for those teachers that are really serious and that will really push you into reality, confronting reality, deconstructing illusions, the epistemic process, rather than just giving you ideas. Real spirituality is about annihilation of the self. And when I say annihilation of the self, I don't mean suicide, so be careful. Here's the key insight. Nobody wants to do the work of transcending the self. But everyone wants to have the self-image of being good and selfless. People want the fruits of spiritual work without doing the work. I mean, that's natural, right? The mind is always looking for shortcuts. So that's the shortcut. You know, in business, the shortcut is, how can I get a bunch of money quickly? By scamming somebody. In a relationship, the shortcut is like, how can I quickly have some sex and then move on? And then, by lying or some manipulation technique. And then in spirituality, the shortcut is, how can I virtue signal about being a good spiritual person, mystical person, selfless person, while being still selfish and fundamentally nothing about it, about my survival and my mind has really changed. Why is Jesus so revered? Because he's supposedly so selfless, right? So loving. Why is the Buddha revered? Also, same reasons. But to become that selfless and that loving, if we're to believe these myths at all, you would need to completely deconstruct yourself. And the only way to do that is by going through this brutal, ruthless self-annihilation process, which, if we're to believe the myths, Jesus or Buddha went through. But see, you don't even know. You don't know the degree to which they completed this self-annihilation. You don't know to what degree they had cultural biases, how racist they were, how sexist they were, how cruel they were to animals. You have no idea. Just because they had some enlightenment doesn't mean that they weren't assholes. They weren't racists. They weren't sexist. They weren't rapists or whatever. You don't know any of this. Could easily have been. Many examples of enlightened people being rapists, molesters, and abusers, exploiters, scammers, and whatever else. You're never going to become like a Jesus by worshiping Jesus. You're never going to become like a Jesus by praying. The only hope you have of doing that is completely deconstructing all human ideas and traditions, all community, all socializing, all culture, all of science, all of religion, all of the New Age. If you deconstruct all of that, maybe you have a chance. So be very careful about the virtue signaling. And here's the key, is that what most spiritual people are doing is they are doing survival with spiritual flavor. Normal people, unspiritual people, they're just doing survival. Spiritual New Age people are doing survival with spiritual flavor. And then very, very few people, the most serious spiritual people, what they've realized is that all of that spiritual flavor stuff is just more distraction, and that what the real work is eliminating the self and eliminating survival entirely, making it completely conscious. When you make survival completely conscious, you realize that all of the spiritual flavor survival is still survival. Going to Burning Man and having a threesome is still survival. Even though it sounds very spiritual. Now, you might say, well, but Leo, aren't there many ways of doing spirituality? Aren't you being arrogant here to claim that this is the only way of doing it, your way? Isn't that like what every religion does? It says it's only my way. Again, like I said at the beginning, I'm very well aware of this trap. I'm not trying to tell you that my way is the only way of doing spirituality. There's a diversity of ways of doing genuine spirituality. People have different personalities, different strengths and weaknesses, and so they will require different techniques. Not all the same techniques will work, which is why I recommend exploring a variety of techniques. All right? So I'm not here to tell you that you have to do spirituality my way. I'm here to tell you that there are certain parameters, general parameters, they're very general, and then I'm here to help you to find, what's going to work for you, which is why I encourage trying different techniques. Try Kriya Yoga, try meditation, try concentration, try retreats, and so forth. But then I want you to be very cautious about fooling yourself, because remember, it's all about self-deception here. So just notice this trap, is that if you just say that, well, spirituality, everybody can just do spirituality any way they want, then that means that your ego now has a license to call any distraction a legitimate spiritual practice. So like when you're smoking weed with your friends at the nightclub, and then you're telling yourself that, well, that's my way of doing spirituality. You see the problem with that? Or when you go to a festival and then you have a threesome on LSD, and then you tell yourself, oh, yeah, we were being very spiritual. Really? This is where self-honesty again is required. We want to be pretty rigorous about how we define this stuff. And I'm not trying to impose rigor on you. I'd like you to realize of your own recognizance. I'd like you to recognize why you should be rigorous about this. Because if you're not going to be rigorous, you're going to deceive yourself. Because nobody can bullshit you as effectively as you will bullshit yourself with what you consider to be genuine spirituality. Is your spiritual process making you more conscious? Is it helping you to see all of your survival mechanics? Is it helping you to deconstruct illusion? Is it making you more selfless? If it's not, then you're fooling yourself. Okay, here's a list of things that corrupt spirituality. What spirituality is not. Spirituality is not survival. Spirituality is not the human finite self, serving that self, protecting and defending that self. Scheming, right? So notice what your self is doing most of the time. Most of the time, your mind is scheming for how to serve yourself. That is not spirituality. And then if you sprinkle some spiritual flavor on it, that's still you serving the self. That's still not what spirituality ought to be. It is not about defending mental constructs and positions. Notice that anytime you're getting defensive, you're not doing spirituality. It is not belief, dogma, and ideology. It is not closed-mindedness. It is not fantasies, stories, myth, and history. It is not authority, trusting and believing in authorities. It is not tradition. It is not the worship of human beings or any kind of icons or symbols. Spirituality is corrupted, of course, by material gain. Money, sex, power, fame, luxury, and wealth. These are the top ways of corrupting spirituality. So what happens, of course, is that all of these things get mixed in with spirituality in a very clever and deceptive way. Such that, most people know that if I just go on Wall Street making a bunch of money, most people know that's not spiritual. Even Wall Street people do not fool themselves that they're there to be spiritual. However, what you can do is you can become, some Instagram influencer, some spiritual influencer who travels around to various spiritual locations with, a camera crew. And you go to Burning Man, you go to the Amazon, you go to, to Stonehenge, and you go to Egypt and all these ancient sites, and you put these beautiful, Instagram shots and YouTube videos, and you do this kind of stuff. And while you're doing that, you're also selling some merch, of course, some nice, water bottles with your logo on them. And these are 100% recycled water bottles to save the whales and the environment, sort of thing, right? But of course, you're doing this for money. You're doing this for fame. And as you're doing this, you're building your follower base, and you're living in a luxury condo in some high rise. And then you're hobnobbing with wealthy people and celebrities. You're hanging out with celebrities. And then you're getting involved a little bit into politics, and you're doing some of that. And then in your mind, you're rationalizing this as you being spiritual. This is the trap. You're asking for donations. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with asking for donations. I have a Patreon. People donate stuff to me sometimes. But you notice how little of my work is about that? That's not the focus of my work. Merch is not the focus of my work. Glamour shots on Instagram is not the focus of my work. What else corrupts spirituality is romance and sex. Schemes to get laid. So a lot of what fake spirituality is about is actually a scheme to get yourself laid. I could easily do that. I could start a convention where people fly into town. I could have a couple of employees who screen my audience for the hottest girls, and I could sleep with them. That would be so easy for me to do. And then I could justify all that under spiritual, I could invent some sort of like scheme, like, oh, we're going to be doing tantric massages, a seminar on tantric massages. You don't think I can come up with this shit? I mean, this is so like brain dead easy to come up with. Yoga class, Actualized.org yoga class, whatever. And then when I find these girls, I'm going to call them my twin flames, and I'm going to call them the divine, feminine and all this. And I'm going to say that these are my, my soul mates from another life. And then I'm going to say that God told me to do all this, inspired me. Money corrupts spirituality as well. If you turn this into a get-rich-quick scheme, or just, I guess, a get-rich scheme, it doesn't have to be quick. Even if it's slow, it's a problem in this case. See, the time that you're investing as a spiritual teacher or person, the time that you're investing into marketing, advertising, accounting, managing money, handling money, coming up with schemes for how to monetize stuff, all of that already is a distraction. You have to realize. Now, I'm not saying that you can't earn some money. Of course, we all have to eat. Some money is fine, but you have to be so careful. So careful with how you do that. Business and marketing corrupt spirituality. Genuine spirituality should have as little business and marketing in it as possible, which is why I don't do any marketing. Which is not to say that I won't in the future do a little bit more marketing than I do now, because now I literally do zero. I've literally done zero marketing for the last 10 years. So there are costs to that, because at some point it might not be sustainable at all. But I'm not demonizing any of these things. It's just, again, just separate them, right? I'm not saying you can't run a business, or you can't market, or you can't make money, or you can't have sex. You can do all these things. Just stop saying it's spiritual. It's survival. That's what it is, survival. I do all this stuff, but I recognize it as survival. And I'm very careful to try to separate it from my teachings. Because the more it bleeds in, the more corrupt the teachings become. Another thing that corrupts spirituality is political agenda, turning spirituality into a scheme to gain power, political power. Also, what corrupts is ambition and the using of spirituality to try to make yourself feel important, a scheme for self-promotion. It's very enticing to be a spiritual leader because people look up to you, you get showered with approval and love and all this. People who are addicted to love from others, and not just love, but even just approval, fame, and so forth, it becomes very alluring. Almost, it could be more alluring than sex even. I've gone through the last 12 years or so of a bit of a popularity, and I've experienced kind of like what fame is like, and I've been showered with a lot of praise and so forth. And I've noticed that it corrupted me. Not in some terrible way, but it definitely corrupted me. And I had to work to undo that. I took about a year or two off from publishing any videos. For about a whole year, I didn't post anything to YouTube. And then people were wondering what happened to me and all that sort of stuff. There's a complex set of reasons of what went on there, but ultimately what I needed to do was I needed to break free of this sort of social media influencer, vortex. It's really it really is a whole dream that you get sucked into when you become a successful social media influencer. It's a whole dream. It's very, very alluring, and you have a lot of pressure to post more content, get more likes, get more approval, make sexier thumbnails and all this kind of stuff, make your people happy, make your followers happy. I had to just completely cut all that off. That was painful for me to do. That was part of my spiritual process and keeping myself honest, is just like saying no to all of that, because all of that is a distraction from the real work. And I still have real work to do. I'm not done. Which is why I'm publishing less these days. I'm publishing less because I'm spending a lot more time doing genuine spiritual work and not just posting videos. Because when I'm making and posting videos, I'm very clear with myself. That is not spiritual work. Me recording this video is not spiritual work. I mean, it helps in some sort of way, because when I'm teaching, I'm also learning. So in a moderate way, sort of, it helps. But I'm under no illusions that just talking about this stuff is me really doing the serious work. The serious work that I do is when I sit alone in a closet for a week by myself. And then you don't hear from me during that. So all the most serious work I do, you never see on the internet. What this is a business, right? This is business. And also teaching, benefiting you. But it doesn't really elevate my consciousness to talk about this stuff. Another corrupting distraction and problem with spirituality, what spirituality is not, is it's not community, it is not groupthink, it is not conformity, it is not social survival, it is not tribalism. It is also not seeking love and approval from others. So one of the things that I had to do over that year that I was gone is that I didn't read any of my YouTube comments. Because usually when I read my comments, it's a lot of positivity, praise, and so forth. And that affects my mind, my ego, and so forth. And it becomes addictive. You do that for years and it becomes addictive. You get used to getting all this approval. I cut that off for a whole year. I lived for a whole year without any approval from you guys. Because that's what was required to really do the spiritual work that I had to do, right? It's very, very important to disconnect yourself from needing love from outside. You need to generate all of your own love. Because spirituality is supposed to be about love, right? But then the trick that the mind does is like, well, yeah, spirituality is all about love, so I'm going to be doing stuff, creating stuff for the world so that I get love back in return, right? I'm going to publish a book. I'm going to do this seminar. I'm going to do this workshop. I'm going to release this video. I'm going to release this course, and then people are going to love me for it. And then that's spirituality. No, it's not. It's not. Real spirituality is that you're stuck on a deserted island for the rest of your life, and you're still full of love. Even though you never talk to another human ever again, you're full of love and you're happy because you're surrounded by the love of God, not by humans telling you how great you are. Spirituality is also not human bias. There's a lot of human bias that you need to deconstruct. And then bias in general. I have a few episodes about bias. Go see that. Understanding bias and self-bias. Those are two titles of my pretty good, deep bias episodes. All bias corrupts spirituality. To understand God, you need to have a completely unbiased mind. And then from traditions and from communities, you get a lot of bias that you just absorb by osmosis. So that's a problem. Also, spirituality is not ritual. Ritual has nothing to do with consciousness of God. Now, some rituals can help. Like if you have a meditation ritual, okay, good, it can help. But you have to see that ritual itself has nothing to do with truth or with God. If you're conscious of God and truth, you're conscious of it right now, right here, no ritual required. So people get attached to rituals. That's a problem. That then limits them. See, spirituality is becoming unlimited. It's becoming infinite. And so any of these kind of things that we're talking about on this list, it's all limits, right? Your mind is being limited by all these things, being limited by ritual, by community, by socializing, by conformity. These are all limits on the mind. What we're really trying to do is I'm trying to make your mind go infinite, right? Infinite mind. That's God. Spirituality is also not about monopolization of truth. That corrupts spirituality. When you say that I have the truth and only I have the truth and my way of the truth is the only way, which is what most religions do, and cults as well. Notice that in my teachings, even though I talk a lot about truth, and I tend to be pretty assertive about, how to go about finding truth and what truth is, I'm also very cognizant of this problem of monopolizing truth. I try not to monopolize it. I try not to say that your version of truth is going to be like mine. Because it's going to be different because you have a different personality and you have different, maybe you're more feminine than me or whatever. And then that's going to be a different flavor of truth for you, even though, truth is still truth, no matter how feminine you are or whatever. Another thing that corrupts spirituality is coercing or forcing others into it. You can't force people to do spirituality or into truth, and you can't shame them, and you can't guilt them into it, and you can't moralize them into it. Which leads us to the next corrupting factor, which is morality, preaching, proselytizing, and crusading. All of this is wrong. This is false spirituality. You should not be, as a spiritual person, you should not be telling anybody what to do. You should not be telling anybody what's right, what's wrong. All of this is wrong. Ironically. But you know what I mean. The difference is when I say something is wrong, I say it relativistically. When like a fundamentalist says something is wrong, they actually believe it. They believe it in an absolute sense. Demonizing is the next factor that's a problem. Whenever you're demonizing any aspect of reality or person, that's false spirituality. Also, false spirituality is about feeling good and escaping suffering. Why? Because that's still selfish. That's still about you. You're too focused on you, is the bottom line. So real spirituality is stop caring how you feel. Now, when I say that, I don't mean suppress your feelings. I mean prioritize truth and consciousness over feelings. And I don't mean not to take care of yourself. For example, if you're in an abusive relationship and your boyfriend is abusing you, I'm not saying that now just suck it up and take it. I'm not saying that. In that case, your feelings are giving you important signals and messages about the fact that you need to leave this dysfunctional boyfriend. So that's, that's kind of a no-brainer there. However, this constant need for positivity and for love and for approval and for feeling good all the time, this is a corruption of spirituality. Genuine spirituality is that you become so conscious that whether you're feeling good or bad, it doesn't matter to you because you're conscious throughout all of it. And this makes it easier for you to endure suffering. And then eventually this leads to a dissolving of suffering entirely. But still, you're not doing it for the purpose of avoiding suffering. You're doing it for the purpose of escaping illusion and because you want truth, right? This is a subtle distinction. Because you might say, well, what's the difference between escaping suffering for just because it feels good versus escaping suffering for truth? There actually is a difference there. It's a difference in intention. It's an important difference. We'll talk about that in a separate episode at some point. Also, spirituality is not about emotional attachment. Your emotional attachments corrupt spirituality. Especially your negative emotions, fear, hate, anger, disgust, shame, guilt, jealousy, envy, depression, lust, excitement. You need to become conscious of why these emotions are arising, why you're attached to all these different aspects of reality. And also, Spirituality becomes fake when it turns into a coping mechanism for human problems. It's like, I have relationship problems or I have an addiction problem. This is, for example, a problem that I have with 12-step programs, which I recognize they're useful for addicts. However, the problem is that spirituality in 12-step programs is being used far too shallowly. It's still being used towards human survival fundamentally. The 12-step program, it's a survival program. It's not real spirituality. It's about helping somebody who's deeply dysfunctional emotionally and traumatized to, become more functional by curing and just looking inwards and fixing some of those problems. That's good. That's useful. That's survival. But don't confuse it with existential stuff. It's not a transcendence of life and death. It's not a realization of the hallucination of even your, even your drug addiction is a fucking hallucination in the end. That's what you don't realize, and that's what a 12-step program doesn't realize. The entire 12-step program is a hallucination. So be careful with just using spirituality as just a coping mechanism for dealing with life. Oftentimes, when something goes bad for somebody in their life, they turn to spirituality. Somebody gets cancer in the family, you start going to church. Or a war starts in your neighborhood, you start going to church. Or you find Jesus. Or they lock you up in prison for being an asshole, and now you found Jesus. Or now you found Allah, Andrew Tate style. This is fake. The real measure of your genuine spirituality is if you're doing it when things are going well for you. When you got a bunch of money and sex and all that stuff, and you're flying high, are you thinking about truth? Are you thinking about existential matters? That's the real test. Here's an example of what I mean by fake versus real spirituality, specifically when it comes to prayer, right? So most people pray in a fake way. What does this mean? For example, the typical prayer is like, my child is sick, and so I'm going to go pray for my child to get better health. I'd like you to recognize that that's fake spirituality. Why? Because really what you're being selfish. You, your family, all of your agenda, everything you need to survive, that's what your prayers are about. Improving all that. You're surviving. You're doing spiritual flavored survival when you're praying for your child's health. The real prayer would be to pray to God to let you stop caring about your own survival and the survival of your family. That would be real. See? Because this goes against your survival. Now, I'm not saying that you stop caring about your child. You have responsibilities to your child. That's fine. And if your child needs health care, then you go do the material things that are necessary to give him health. But this kind of selfish pleading with God to give you things, even non-material things, obviously, asking God for $1 million is fucking stupid, right? You can see that, how stupid that is, how selfish that is, how antithetical that is to spirituality. But you might say, well, Leo, but my child's health, that's like for my child. That's not even for me. Yeah, but look deeper. Look deeper. Look how absorbed you are with your family and your children. And again, I'm not saying not to care for your children. I'm just saying don't fool yourself what you're really doing when you're caring for your children. When you're caring for your children, that's called survival. What you should really pray for is the strength and courage to confront truth and reality. That's the real prayer. That's the only prayer you need. Help me to face reality. If my child is sick, help me to face that rather than constructing fantasies about my child being better or fantasizing about my child's death, because that's also a fantasy in many cases when you're worrying and over-exaggerating problems. you're not confronting the actual situation. Because genuine spirituality is supposed to serve you no matter what. And if your child's health doesn't work out, genuine spirituality is still supposed to be there for you. If your child dies, that's where real spirituality happens. So stop asking God to protect you from all the shit. Rather, develop your consciousness so that you're able to deal with whatever arises. That's real spirituality. So as we're starting to conclude here, the whole point is that the self and the mind, which is really the same thing, is tricking you. It's always tricking you. The self is unreal, yet it needs to keep surviving. So even when you do spirituality, the self will invent distractions from doing the real work. And what is the real work? I want to put it very starkly to you. The real work is sitting alone in a room with nobody around and just dying of boredom. You sit day after day after day, bored out of your mind, like a heroin addict coming off cold turkey from heroin. And you sit there and you go through the withdrawal until eventually your sense of self dies of boredom. That can take weeks, months. That's real spirituality. That is what everybody in the spiritual field is avoiding. Unless they're serious and unless they went through that process themselves, they're all avoiding it, right? The only person that's not avoiding that and will guide you to it is somebody who's actually gone through it himself or herself, which is extremely rare. Very few people have done that. So try to identify who actually did that and then who didn't. And look for evidence that they did that. Or are they running around and, distracting themselves with whatever spiritual nonsense? People love to talk about God, but they refuse to do the work of deconstructing the self that is necessary to experience God directly. So they invent fantasies of God instead. They confuse those fantasies with reality and truth, and then they act like jackasses to defend and spread those fantasies to distract themselves from the work that they're not interested in doing. Because that work is brutal. It's emotionally brutal. Sitting alone in a room for a few weeks, nonstop, no breaks, no internet, nothing, no socializing, and just dying of boredom, that's the most difficult work you can do on yourself. It's like torture. You're subjecting yourself to torture. They call it solitary confinement in prison. That's some countries consider that cruel and unusual punishment, inhumane. And yet I'm telling you that you're supposed to do solitary confinement voluntarily on your own, just of your own recognizance and intelligence. Real spirituality is inquiry. Fake spirituality is everything that distracts from inquiry. Crystals, iconography, yoga class, astrology, tarot cards, changing your name to some spiritual Hindu name. Dressing up in hippie ways, prayer, worship, even books, history, going to church, Burning Man, tantric sex, incense, traveling to the pyramids, rituals, going to fortune tellers. Why is all of this fake? Because it's a distraction from inquiry. Now look, yoga class is fine. I'm talking about hatha yoga, physical yoga. I'm not saying there's no benefits to yoga. There are benefits to yoga, even the physical hatha yoga. And of course, Kriya yoga has many direct benefits. But your typical hatha yoga class has nothing to do with inquiry. And you can go to a typical hatha yoga class for 20 years, which many girls do. And are they any more conscious of God? No, they have no idea what God is. So that's why I'm calling it fake. All of these different things can have ancillary benefits here and there. It's possible for you to go to Burning Man and to have some sort of mystical experience. That's possible, of course. But is it inquiry? How direct is it? The problem, of course, is that the ego and the self gets offended and hurt when it's told that its spirituality is fake? Who wants to hear that their spirituality is fake? But I don't want to force this upon you. I don't want to force to tell you what spirituality is. I want you rather to, if you're into some of these New Age practices, I want you to, for yourself, just being very self-honest, and because you're so committed to truth, I want you to introspect and really ask yourself, is this class I'm going to, is this dress I'm wearing, is this, are these mala beads that I'm buying, is that really raising my consciousness and getting me closer to God? And is it inquiry? You answer that for yourself. Or is it a clever distraction? So almost everybody conflates spirituality with survival, thereby inventing spiritual flavored survival. That's the trap. And you see this if you look at every single religion that has ever existed, every single cult, every single spiritual community, they have all fallen into this trap. This is the mother of spiritual traps, is conflating spirituality with collective survival. What is the Catholic Church doing? What are evangelicals doing at church? What even are monks doing in a monastery? The majority of the monks in a Zen monastery in Japan, hardcore, they're supposed to be hardcore spirituality, right? What are they doing most of the time? They're only meditating. It actually kind of shocked me when I learned the facts of this, because I assumed that monks in a monastery, they're meditating like 12 hours a day, right? They got nothing else to do. What are you doing? And there's nothing else to do. It's a mountaintop. There's nothing there. No, they spend like 10 hours a day cleaning and doing administrative duties of the monastery, just upkeeping the monastery, and only 3 or 4 hours a day meditating. I mean, that's shocking. That's shocking. You can achieve, a typical guy working on Wall Street can achieve 3 hours of meditation. You can work on Wall Street and then still meditate for 3 hours a day. So then why are you a monk? The purpose of being a monk is that you're meditating at least 12 hours a day. That's what it should be. And yet people go join these monasteries and look, it works too. You can still achieve a lot even with 3 hours a day if you're doing it every single day for years consistently, and you're in that kind of community and there's fewer distractions. Of course, that's still beneficial. I'm not discounting that. But just notice how all traditions, inevitably, there's no exceptions to this, inevitably every single tradition, no matter if it's in the East or the West, it's always going to conflate collective survival with spirituality. And that's a huge source of corruption and a huge problem. Just notice that. Okay, now here's a list of how to do real spirituality. This is like the essence of it. First, complete not knowing. Your objective is to get to not knowing as quickly and as deeply as possible. Not to know stuff, but to not know stuff. It's a focus on epistemology and inquiry. Throw away all beliefs, all traditions, all concepts. Throw away religion, throw away science, throw away philosophy. It's a deep care for truth. You prioritize truth over everything else. Truth becomes your highest value. Everything is based on direct experience. No hearsay, no history, no tradition, no beliefs. Direct experience. If it's not directly in your experience, you don't care about it, it's not important for your spiritual work. You question and doubt absolutely everything, all human ideas and everyone, all authority figures. You identify all of your fantasies and illusions, and you deconstruct them. You question your own worldview to death. You figure out what you are and what is reality. That's your focus. You're trying to figure out what is reality, what are you? You observe how your mind works. It's a deep study of your own psychology, identifying psychological traps within yourself, all the ways in which you fool yourself, all of your emotional attachments, emotional reactivity, and so forth. You identify principles of proper, truthful living, and you align your life with that. This work is done solo. No socializing, no community, no preaching, no crusading, no moralizing, no virtue signaling, no judging. That doesn't mean you can't socialize or you can't be part of a community, but you don't mix your spirituality with that. You deconstruct all social conditioning, religion, science, culture. All cultures. You surrender all mental attachments to all ideas and all theories. It's mindfulness, profound mindfulness, applying consciousness to everything you do. It's a constant, daily, near 24/7 mindfulness meditation as you go about doing mundane life. It's facing the mundane, face boredom. It's hyper sobriety. You become so sober that you die of boredom, and then the magic of existence and God permeates your everyday mundane existence. That's real spirituality, not running around chasing mystical experiences. Although, of course, I'm big on mystical experiences, don't get me wrong. I haven't changed my position. Psychedelics are still very powerful, very important, and those mystical experiences that you can have on them are important. But they are not an end in and of themselves. Real spiritual work is hardcore, long, week-long meditation retreats. And also psychedelics, not in a party setting, but with real serious intent in an almost retreat-like setting where you're doing serious inquiry. You're using the psychedelics to deepen your inquiry. You're using it to deconstruct all social conditioning, religion, science, culture, all that stuff. And to deal also with your own therapeutic work, all the baggage, shadow work, all that kind of stuff. You're dealing with that as well. Psychedelics help you to get a deeper self-reflection, more introspection on yourself. You try to cut out all addictions and distractions, whatever those are for you. You're very, very careful about noticing everything that can be a distraction, from earning money to starting a family to whatever that is. You create time and space in your life for sitting and doing nothing at all. And then that's your core spiritual practice. You start no spiritual communities, no socializing, no partying, no sex, no wealth, no luxury, no fame, no power, no business, no ambition to be famous. Now, again, I'm not saying you can't pursue money or buy a house or have sex. That's fine, but you do not conflate it with your spiritual practice. You keep those things separate. You do not trust humanity or any human being. You take full responsibility for your epistemic process to become a sovereign mind. You disconnect spiritual work from your survival. You become conscious of everything you do that is self-survival, so that you're not fooling yourself. When you're surviving, you're clear with yourself that you're doing survival. You're not dressing it up in poetic language. You're making all of your emotions conscious to yourself, why these emotions are arising. You're taking responsibility for that rather than saying that other people are doing stuff to you or reality is making you feel this way. So that's the list of real spirituality. At least this is my version. To me, this is like the purest form. And then the more you stray from this, the less pure your spirituality gets, until eventually it devolves into pure nonsense and it becomes so counterproductive as to harm people and drive people into deeper and deeper delusion. Now you might say, but Leo, going to church helps me feel spiritual, or reading the Bible helps me feel spiritual, or worshiping Jesus helps me feel spiritual, or going to yoga class helps me feel spiritual, or tantric sex at Burning Man makes me feel spiritual, or loving my family helps me feel spiritual. I get it, yeah. You want to feel spiritual by doing stuff that has a spiritual theme to it. But do you feel spiritual if you're just sitting alone in a room by yourself? That's the litmus test. Because if you're spiritual then you'll also be spiritual in everything else that you do. And if you're not spiritual on the cushion, alone in your room, then no amount of tantric sex or hanging out with your family is going to really solve the issue. Because at the end of the day, after you do all that stuff, you're going to come home and you're going to be alone in your room, and then you're going to be dissatisfied, and you're not going to be spiritual. You're not going to be connected to God. Contemplate this question. What happens if you are too lax about what counts as spiritual work? Why do we call it work? Spiritual work. It's called work because you are going against automatic survival habits. You're a survival machine. Everything about you is automatic survival. Changing that cannot be effortless. It's like, some New Age person will say, oh, spirituality can just be effortless, right? Why make it work, Leo? When you call it work, you're making it like you're projecting that onto the situation. It doesn't have to be work. No, it has to be work. Because by definition, undoing all of your survival habits, that can't be easy. That's not easy for anybody. There's no person that's born and this is easy for them. Of course, for some people it's harder than others, depending on your upbringing and so forth, and even in your genetics and your personality type. But this can't be easy, which is why it's valuable. See, if it was easy, everybody would be awake. Everybody would realize God. Everybody would be healthy. Everybody would have mental health. Everybody would be well functioning. And how many people are? Virtually nobody. My highest responsibility is to uphold this high standard for pure spirituality, free of distractions, illusions, corruptions, and human fluff, human biases. Because it's so rare. To understand what I understand about spirituality puts that responsibility on me. Because I understand how few people understand it. So what I'd like to impart to you is this kind of high standard that then you will uphold for yourself. Not as a dogma, mind you, not because you trust or believe me, or because I'm an authority figure, but because you have done the work to have insights about why it's so critical to distinguish the real from the fake in this work. You see through the light of your own mind how important this distinction is. And so therefore you commit as part of your truth-seeking commitment to enforce this on yourself because you don't want to be living in illusions. Because the worst thing for you to do would be to turn your spiritual process into an illusion itself. Because that's the only thing that can save you from illusion. So if that process becomes corrupted, then you're lost. You're truly lost. Now you might say, well, but Leo, this is such a bummer. I want to be a spiritual flavored self. I don't want to annihilate myself. That doesn't sound very fun. It sounds like you're making spirituality this chore. So this is important. This is the final point I'm going to make here. Despite everything I said here, spirituality is not supposed to be a chore. What I'm inviting you to do is to fall in love with reality. That's what spirituality ultimately boils down to. Why are we transcending illusions and deconstructing culture and deconstructing science and deconstructing the self and deconstructing all this new age fluff? Because in the end, we just want pure reality. We want the purest connection to reality possible. That's what we want. That's the real gold. Everything else is fool's gold. And having a spiritual flavored self does not get us that close connection to reality that we would get if we just eliminate the self entirely. The reason we're annihilating the self and why you should be excited about annihilation of the self, and I don't mean suicide, annihilation of the self, is because then you're free of your own bullshit. You're even free of your spiritual bullshit. And then what you have is you have direct connection to God, to your infinite self. That's the gold. The spiritual self is fool's gold. This is not a chore. You're frame it in your mind that you really want the truth. You want to fall in love with the truth. You want reality. You want to fall in love with reality. Therefore, when you're cutting through all this human bullshit, that's exciting. That's fun for you. It's not a chore to cut through bullshit. It's fun to deconstruct science. It's fun to deconstruct religion. It's fun to laugh at it because it's so stupid. It's fun to see things how they actually are, not fantasies. Now, this is granted, if you've been living in fantasy your whole life, you're so addicted to fantasy that now the truth is so painful to you. It doesn't seem like fun. But truth is an investment. You have to invest in it long term, year after year after year, decade after decade, and then truth becomes sweet. Because it's real. You really appreciate it. You can look at a butterfly and you see that's a real thing. That butterfly is real. You appreciate it. It brings you to tears. How beautiful. The beauty of the butterfly is real. That's not a fantasy. And then there is a sort of meta beauty. There's a beauty to Maya as well, right? So all of the illusion and fantasy that you transcend ultimately and escape through completion of this work, you're still going to see all that illusion and fantasy all around you because everybody around you is going to be living in it. Society is it. Society is lost in Maya. So you're going to see it everywhere. But then you're going to appreciate the intelligence of Maya, the intelligence of the illusion, the intelligence of survival in animals and humans, in politics and everybody. Even though you're going to be above it, you're going to transcend it to various degrees, maybe not perfectly, but the bulk of it you're going to transcend, the most ridiculous stuff. And then you're going to look back at it, you're going to see just how lost everybody is. And then there's a genius behind that. The genius behind the dream, right? You're appreciating the dream, you're appreciating the illusion, and then you fall in love with Maya. You fall in love with the illusion. And when I say you fall in love with Maya, that's not the same thing as being lost in Maya. People that are lost in Maya are not in love with Maya. They're just in love with themselves and human bullshit. They don't even know what Maya is. They don't see Maya. They don't see survival. They're zombies. You fall in love with Maya. You fall in love with the dream once you awaken from the dream. You fall in love with illusion. Illusion, infinite illusion, which is what God is infinite illusion. This infinite hallucination that is the universe. This is the most miraculous and beautiful thing that could exist. That's your connection. That's the goal. That's the payoff for all this work. So it's very important that you reframe your spiritual process into something positive. You're not doing it for negative purposes. Like, don't do it under this kind of feeling like, oh, the ego is this bad, evil thing and it sucks and it creates a lot of suffering and I just need to escape it. No, that's the wrong frame. That's the wrong frame. In the end, the reason I'm teaching you all this is because I want you to live in infinite beauty. I want you to recognize the beauty of God, the infinite intelligence of God, of a mind that hallucinates a universe out of nothing. That's the payoff here. My payoff is not money. My payoff is when you realize just what everybody is missing. When you realize infinity, the beauty of infinity, that's the payoff. So you're not doing spirituality to escape suffering. You're doing spirituality to experience God.